y'all been doing? Is your office ready yet? No?
We got held up. I mean, it almost is ready. We got held up. We get water to us. Get it permanent. I shouldn't say we didn't get it to us. It's sitting there ready. We get it permanent. And then went out for testing. Don't get me started. Yeah, well, that was all done. Water to the building, that's sitting there ready. It's huge. It wasn't nothing.
Expected date yet?
We've got it now. But it's like 3 months late. It's frustrating. They got it permitted. We thought it was all done.
Hey, good afternoon. Just
How
got
are you,
snuck
sir?
in over
Mr.
here.
Chairman. You too.
It's an all.
Yeah, John, they had it before. They had it permitted.
You guys survived the summer okay?
Yeah, just barely.
You know, his barn was right here. They had it permitted down here. But not up this little cut right here. So literally like 10 feet away. Thought it was all done. Yeah.
So
Anyway, there's just a disconnect between civil and
how's that?
at least from our experience, we've been happy with it. He just did the upfit inside.
Was I talking about Davies about new furniture?
Yes, we're not. They did we did modular walls and everything. So they did that. It's been a. You have to understand our office change. Anyway, 1 minute we're moving over there, the next minute we're not. 1 minute is the whole building's for lease, the next minute is the bottom. So I think they've been kind of like. Yeah, exactly. The walls are in, but on the furniture, I think. It's just. Yeah, oh yeah, I know. Yep. So. Yeah, and they'll probably. Right. It's one of those projects. That's right. Last on the list. Exactly. I think I got one. I think. Yeah, I just picked mine up. I think those are you. Big crowd in here tonight. Did hear that. Their Class A is here, right? I did hear that.
I saw a picture and I thought it was a joke. It's for real. He's a new coach. That'll be interesting.
That will be interesting.
Change the crowd dynamic.
Might help with the attendance a little bit. That'll make it real fun. They have had a good. They have. Didn't they break a record? Yeah. I don't know. Take what we can get.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the September 8th Design Development Review Commission for the City of Columbia. We welcome you. The commission is made up of volunteers with expertise or interest in historic preservation and design. We generally meet on the second Thursday of the month to review cases. The commission is supported by the city's urban planning and historic preservation staff who are here today. Please let them know if you have any questions during the proceedings, but please take care not to impede the same. The meeting generally proceeds with staff calling the case and describing it. The applicant may also come forward to add to the basic description if necessary. If so, please try to keep your presentation to less than 10 minutes. The commissioners will then have the opportunity to ask questions. After this period, I will ask if there is anyone in the audience who wishes to speak for or against the proposal, and audience comments shall be kept to 2 minutes per person. If there is, the applicant will have an opportunity to respond, and this rebuttal will be kept to 5 minutes. In most of the cases, we will make a decision tonight after all information has been presented. If your case is denied, or if you feel that our decision was made in error, you and anyone with standing have the opportunity to appeal it within 30 days of the decision. All decisions of this commission are based on existing guidelines and ordinances of the City of Columbia. If you plan to speak about a specific project, you must have signed in. The sheet is at the back of the room and/or at the podium. Please note that these meetings are streamed live, they are recorded and broadcast, so please use discretion with any personal information you choose to share in the course of the proceedings. All motions, again, and decisions are made while applying all of the facts to all of the guidelines. All parties who are planning to testify, would you please stand and raise your right hand? Quite a number of you, huh? Do you all affirm to tell the truth in these proceedings? Thank you very much. Have a seat. Will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bachnight? Here. Mr. Gressett?
Here.
Mr. Herger? Mr. Powell?
Here.
Mr. Savory?
Here.
Mr. Wynn?
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you very much. Does the agenda still stand?
We've had a few changes since publication. Under the historic portion of the agenda, 1621 Main Street, which was a request for exterior changes and preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill for the structure in the National Register District and the City Center Design Development District, has been deferred. Likewise, 1625 Main Street for the same request. 1311 Somerville Avenue in the Cottontown Architectural Conservation District has deferred a request for approval for exterior changes. 2130 Senate Street has deferred a request in the Old Chandon Lower Waverly Protection Area for changes to approved plans on new construction. 801 Florence Street, a request for approval for exterior changes in Earlwood Protection Area A has been withdrawn. 931A Senate Street, a request for approval for exterior changes in the West Gervais Commercial Historic District has been withdrawn. 1923 through 25 Pickens Street, a request for approval for exterior changes and preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill in the Landmark District has been deferred. 2307 Wayne, a request for approval for new construction in Elmwood Park has been withdrawn. And the southeast corner of Gervais and Lincoln Streets, which is adjacent to 902 Gervais Street, and is a request for approval for new construction for a visitor center in the West Gervais Historic Commercial District and the City Center Design Development District has been deferred.
Thank you very much. The Design Development Review Commission uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. Examples of such items include residential site improvements such as fences, minor exterior changes, or signage. If a member of the DDRC or the general public wants to discuss an item on the consent agenda at the beginning of the meeting, that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The DDRC then approves the remaining consent agenda items. Would you read that consent agenda now, please?
Certainly. Under the urban portion of the consent agenda, we have 1400 Lady Street, which is in the City Center Design Development District. This was a request for exterior changes to an existing building. Under the historic portion of the consent agenda, we have 1350 Main Street, which is an individual landmark in the city. This is a request for approval for signage. 2228 Rembert Street, which is in the Elmwood Park Architectural Conservation District, has a request forward for a certificate of design approval for exterior changes and for preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill. And lastly, we have 2150 Hardin Street. This is the Babcock Building. The wings of the building are being proposed for landmark designation. And that's the extent of the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there anyone wishing to remove an item from the consent agenda, either within the audience or within the commission? That being the case, no. Is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as it stands?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion that we accept the consent agenda as recommended by the staff.
Very good. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Would you call the roll for a vote, please?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Gressett?
Yes.
Mr. Herger? Mr. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Savory? Mr. Nguyen?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We now will move on to the regular agenda, and we'll call on staff to introduce the first case, please.
That's going to bring us to the site plan review at 933 Main Street, and it's site plan review for the construction of a 12-unit apartment building. The property is about 13,000 square feet and contains a 6,000 square foot mixed-use building, the Immaculate Conception Building, and the property, this project entails the construction of a 14,000 square foot building over an existing parking lot and will contain 12 apartments. The project requires 26 parking spaces, off-street parking spaces, and the applicant is proposing to provide 21. In that there's a lack in 6 parking spaces, the applicant is requesting a variance through the Board of Zoning Appeals, and that case will be heard by the board on this Tuesday. There are many staff comments listed in the case summary. However, the majority of them are minor in nature and routine, and the applicant is present and can explain their case.
Thank you very much. We're trying to get our video set here. We've got nothing going on, so if you guys will just bear with us a little bit. Is the applicant here who would like to speak to the design or site plan approval for 933 Main Street? You've been sworn in, sir? Okay. Please state your name and be sure to speak into the mic so
Yes,
that
sir.
we can...
Bradley Van Name. I am the architect.
Welcome.
Thank you. You want me to go ahead and just...
Yes,
Okay.
please.
We
acquired this project, or actually the property back in 2012, and did a renovation on the existing building then, and then did a feasibility study for actually developing the rear portion of the property, which contained a existing parking lot, which is currently leasing. And the developer wanted to know whether or not we could develop apartments above the parking lot. We did some feasibility sketches and basically went through a learning curve about what we could do with this property, and increased our knowledge about what the existing boundaries were for the property, because there are power lines and other boundaries other than the property itself. So as we increased our knowledge, the actual buildable area of the property shrank to what we now show as our building. The parking is precious to the project in order to do as much as we can to meet the criteria for off-street parking. We need a certain footprint on grade to have our exits and handicap for the elevator, and to preserve as much off-street parking as possible. The 3 stories of apartments is the maximum we can achieve in developing the project. We have worked with Lucinda, who's been very helpful in striving to work the facade of the building on the street side, Pendleton Street, to achieve the maximum compliance with the guidelines, even though we do not physically have a retail portion of our building, but to try to create a streetscape that is pleasing to the pedestrian. So with her guidance, we've architecturally massaged the building and worked it to its current configuration. So that's where we are today. We understand that there are still deficiencies because of many of the catch-22s that we deal with, specifically on the west side. We've got the power transmission line that will not allow us to go any further west than we can. And if we do, then So that is from the bank side. So this is the bank here. So that is where the power transmission line is, showing you where the parking, towards the parking lot. And that is one of the boundaries other than the property line that we're dealing with. And what the guidelines would like us to do is be more of a building than a parking lot. And we are, it is tough for us to strike that compromise, to sacrifice parking to create building, which we can do if we are relieved of one criteria to satisfy the other. So we as developer, designer, don't know where to come in and say, if you give me this, you can take that. If you give me this, you can take that. So right now, we are presenting what we believe to be our best solution, with certainly open to reaction, and we understand what we can do to be what we can be with any kind of a compromise, understanding the criteria that we are trying to satisfy on both of these levels.
Great.
That's where we are.
We
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bradley, do you have a site plan we could maybe throw up on the screen, or?
Can you help me with that? That is, the grayer area is where the footprint of the building is. And on the west side here, which would be that north is actually down on this particular Pendleton Street up top, showing our current schematic configuration of placing the building on the site. And
Any questions from the commission? This is site plan only, yes.
so, yes.
Yeah, press your button.
Now? Okay. I have a question, and I have to sort of refer a little bit to the next application because it has to do with just the building and the structure of the building and so forth.
Yes, sir.
But in looking at this, I blew it up and looked at it. I'm not convinced at all that the compact parking spaces can be accessed by automobiles. There's no ability to turn, even if you were to pull in and then back into the space, if the other spaces are full. But my bigger concern, so I don't think that all of these spaces are actually, in my mind, I would question the credibility of it. But my bigger concern is that since your building is set back 4 feet from the face of this very thin wall that you have against the sidewalk, I'm not seeing honestly, a credible expression of structural columns coming down to support the building in this plan. I know that if your building is sitting, this line is approximately 4 feet back. I would be very surprised if you're not going to expect to see columns at each of those corners. I can't imagine that you wouldn't. At that point, those are 4 spaces that have columns in the middle of them. So I'm not sure if the structural engineer has really vetted this yet, but I think that there are going to be some real challenges just from a structural standpoint, floating this building over the top of the existing parking configuration. I don't think that all these spaces will actually be available.
Also on that, Bradley, sort of tell us why I don't think I heard you say this, why you put the residential units back the 4 feet from the Pendleton Street garage. Why did you not bring them out to the property line?
Along Pendleton Street, there is also another setback for the power lines that run along that side of Pendleton Street, which is 10 feet off of the street, which imposes itself onto our property, not the full 10 feet. So we actually have that to deal with. We can actually tuck the building under, but to keep the apartment back, we actually have to platform over and down. And it gives us that little bench, for lack of a better word, to create the apartments and keep the apartments back, the occupied space. It's a
So just
unique.
I'm sorry to
That's okay,
interrupt you. Just for relevance, these are high power lines from the.
These are not the transmission lines. These are the
They're not the-
distribution lines that would
Okay.
come in, that go to the existing building along the front of Pendleton Street. Yes, sir.
Okay.
With
And
kind of the ones that weave themselves into the trees.
yeah. The other question I have in regards to your parking and the importance of those, is there a reason why you have not put forth a design for underground parking?
To do that, the opportunity to circulate to something like that we'd lose too many spaces. The circulation pattern to circulate down and around is just too much square footage. And to go back to this gentleman's question, We have not actually gone into a lot of structural design to say, all right, if we've got posts at the corners and we've got the actual stair, elevator, and whatever we do with the face wall to actually structure this, we have not sized those yet.
Well, I think that this is an unusual case, but I think it's, as an architect myself, it's very clear that there's the structural components have not yet been designed. They're
That's
going to
correct.
be necessary to support the building, and it's clear, it's clear, very clear to me that that's going to knock out some of these parking spaces. So I think that there has to be more understanding of the structural systems and how they impact the parking before we know how much parking actually is available. I don't think it's there. It's clearly not there yet.
Well, schematically, we have examined, I don't want to say numerous, but multiple options as far as what the system could be, and ultimately resolve that in order to do what we need to do and have any opportunity to park. The only thing we can do is structure it in steel. So,
Sure.
yes.
I'm sure that's
In order
I'm sure
to
that's
clear
true.
span and to free up and to maneuver automobiles. We had looked at others just to say, what can the budget stand? Well, the budget can only stand what will allow us to park. So we basically say, all right, we're going to have to do a steel structure. When we examine that and decide on that, and then you say, well, ultimately we have to size this so we can clear it all out, no jungle of columns in between cars and things like that, then we understand what we've got to do as far as what size the columns will be at the corners, as far as, you know, what we have to do to absorb shear. That has not been examined. We haven't analyzed it. You know, to do that much design is to say, well, first of all, can we get approval for our project on this site based on what we know about what we know?
Well, I think, again, to my point, I think there's a fundamental part of this missing, whether it's steel columns or if it were wood columns, or whether they're 2 feet by 2 feet or 18 inches by 18 inches coming down into the parking. It's just very clear that there's going to be columns coming into the middle of parking spaces. So in my mind, I don't think we have a clear picture, even from a preliminary structural standpoint, of how it impacts the parking. So that's my concern. I don't believe that what you're showing.
I don't think there will be columns coming down in the middle of parking spaces, sir.
I have a hard time seeing how you'll avoid that. You're spanning the building you're spanning roughly 45 feet, and the front wall is not coplanar with the 3 stories above. So you're going to have to support those 3 stories somehow coming directly down. And when you do that, I don't see, unless you're willing to spend a tremendous amount of money to have a point load mid-span or partially inboard of the of your beams at either end, which I doubt that you're going to want to spend that money, you're going to end up having a column coming down in the corner of the building from the floor plates above. So those, it's very clear that they'll land in the middle of parking spaces.
I think that was one reason I wanted him to move the outside wall of the apartments northward.
That would solve,
And,
I guess.
and I'm not really sold on the idea why you couldn't do that. I don't catch on to, is it some regulation about the
No, sir. No,
electric
sir.
lines, or you just trying to stay a
We-
certain
we-
distance?
We can do everything under the sun if we can sacrifice parking.
To that, did I hear you correct that, and I'm asking this of staff, that there is yet to be a variance provided?
That is correct. He has applied for a variance for the 6 spaces that he is short. However, if he's unable to provide those 6 spaces after he's done the engineering, he would have to go back to the Board of Zoning Appeals and ask for an additional variance to cover those spaces that he's short.
Okay, thank you. So that does
Mr.
play
Chairman,
into-
one other point. It would seem to me that he ought to get, we ought to get to first base before we go to second base. And it seems like he needs to get his zoning in order before we pass judgment on whether the design is complies with what we're expecting.
Well, that in part is why I asked that question of staff, considering the design dependence on the number of spaces and so on. At this point, is there anyone here from the audience that would like to speak in opposition or approval of this site plan for 933 Main Street? Okay. That being the case, sir, we thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sure, sir. Please come forward, state your name, and tell us your relevance.
Ford Elliott, I'm the real estate developer of this project. I get your point, you know what you're saying. I would like to invite Wes up from Site Design, who's our civil engineer, and I would like you to talk about the functionality of the spaces and how they work.
Well, and there's not a whole lot more I could. All right, my name's Wes Bolin. I'm with Site Design. I'm the civil engineer for this project. There's not a whole lot more I can add to what Bradley was saying, but yeah, we do understand that it is tight. It is going to be a tight parking for certain spaces, and our structural engineer does understand that we have to put these spaces in there, so they have to design their columns around these spaces and set them in specific spots. I mean, if we can't do that, then yeah, we know that the parking will not work if they actually have to fall in a parking space. Then we do know we have to go back to the zoning appeals again to get it done. But we didn't plan to move forward beyond getting a structural design done, just because of actually getting through the site plan and DDRC first to make sure that we would be approved to move forward with spending more on the structural design, which we just know that it has to abide by the parking that we're asking for.
We also do have schematics that have little column layouts. I mean, I'm not saying they're the exact, but we've seen what it sort of looks like. And I mean, it's going to be a structural engineer's task to figure out how to make it work. But we maybe not shown right now columns, but we have looked at where columns might go and how they might impact spaces. But as far as cars going to come in and out of spaces, I mean, you've done little turn radiuses and everything, and you've been able to determine that they're functional.
Well, the compact spaces are.
Those are functional?
Just for compact.
Yeah, will those work? Those two
works.
compact spaces? Will that will work?
It's the ones on the end that are, they're over 9 feet wide. It's one where it says 1 and 1 behind the stairwell.
Well, the two that are 8 feet wide, they're right there immediately when you drive in. This one and the corresponding one on the other side of the north, in the east and west corners.
Well,
There's no turning radius. Those will work? People will be able to get their cars into those if the parking lot's full?
If it's a compact car, yes.
They will be able to?
Like a small car, yeah, they should be able to.
Okay.
It's very compact.
Well, thank you, gentlemen.
It's not the most ideal situation, but I believe it'll work.
Okay.
Now, to answer the question about, you had a question about the building, the way it is aligned. We had a 10-foot from the outside arm on the distribution line for SE&G that we needed to abide by for our it ended up being 4 stories after you count the parking. So that's the reason why it's pushed back on the building part, but not for the parking platform that
Right.
covers it.
I think we got that. We thank you.
Thank you.
All right, at this point, is there any further deliberation or questions by the commission? Okay, that being so, is there a motion on the request for site plan approval for 933 Main Street? Mr. Powell?
Certainly, I'll make a motion. And this is not to disregard Tom's perspective, because I absolutely agree with you, there are issues, but I don't know that that's our problem to fix. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we grant a excuse me, make sure I'm on the right project. Grant design approval for the site plan on, I apologize, 933 Main Street, with all details deferred to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. We have a motion to approve site plan for 933. Is there a second? We have a second. We have a motion for approval and a second. Any further discussion?
I guess
When is it, and is that with staff comments?
with
With the
yes,
incorporation of the staff comments?
conditional on all comments. We're talking about the site approval only,
Correct.
which I don't
Correct.
see any comments. Am I missing something?
Just the site plan approval with the staff comments.
Of course.
That are outlined in the table.
Yes, with the city comments included. Yes, sir.
All right, so that full motion with site plan approval with staff recommendations. Is that correct? All right, we have a second. Is any further discussion? If no,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
again, as a part of discussion, I think there's some uneasiness among us about the order of approval. To me, it would make more sense to get the zoning feedback and see sort of what we're dealing with there. It might make the applicant an easier application, or it might make it even more difficult, or it might take it away entirely. So I guess I'm leaning toward sort of a deferral or denial.
yeah, thank you, Mr. Gressett. I fully understand your perspective. This is not the first time we've had to make a rendering or render a decision prior to a zoning hearing. So yes, I hear what you're saying. We have, though, here a motion for approval. We have second with staff recommendations. So we will move forward here. Will you call the roll for a vote, please?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Gressett?
No.
Mr. Herger? Yes. Mr. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
No.
Mr. Nguyen?
No?
And the motion fails. Well, actually, it's tied.
We have a tie, actually. Is there a second motion that one would like to offer? All right, and I will offer a motion based on the very evident problems of providing parking that meet requirements as definitely part of the guidelines, based on the need for approval or actually variance for parking limitation, and based on the structural design elements that are based or are part and parcel of site plan itself. My motion is to deny the site plan approval for 933 Main Street. And I will ask for a second.
Second.
Okay, the motion is to deny. We have a second with statements provided as to why the motion is to deny. Any further discussion?
I'd like to echo Ashby's comments, and I don't think that it's not possible to have a solution that works and credibly shows us the number of parking spaces that can be gained. I think that the cart's coming a little before the horse at this point, and I think some of those issues need to be ironed out and worked through before it's ready to submit.
Thank you, Mr. Savory, and that is the additional reason for my motion to deny, that perhaps this will give a zoning hearing on variance, the opportunity to be brought forth.
Mr. Chairman, because I intend to agree with that motion, I'd just like to clarify, the reason I'm agreeing with, or intend to agree with your motion when the roll is called, is that this simply prolongs the process. We will see this again in a month and have the opportunity to approve it.
Absolutely. Okay, we have a motion, we've had a second for denial, and we've had discussion. Will you call the roll for a vote, please?
Mr. Bachnight,
Yes.
Mr. Gressett. Mr. Horger. Mr. Powell,
Yes.
Mr. Savory,
Yes.
Mr. Nguyen.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, so motion to deny the request for site plan approval at 933 Main Street is approved. Before us at this time is an additional application for design approval for 930, well, actually, is it,
933.
yeah, for 933 Main Street. Will you present that, please?
Yeah, this is the same property at 933 Main Street. This is the request for certificate of design approval for new construction. This is a new residential apartment building over parking on the parcel with the former Nickelodeon Theater and Immaculate Consumption coffee shop. The existing building will remain, and the architect and developers are here to answer any questions.
Thank you. Is the applicant and design or architect here to present? Once again, please.
Yes, sir.
State your name again and then go forward.
Bradley Van Name, architect. The project again is a 4-story building, parking on the grade level with 3 stories of 4 apartments each level.
Yes.
Yes, sir. The structure is wood studs, brick veneer, 2 2-bedrooms each level, 2 1-bedrooms each level. Anticipated to attract a demographic of students or singles. What else do we need to know?
Well, whatever you'd like to present. We're not here to
Pretty
suggest
much it.
any.
It's fairly basic.
Mhm.
Basically, what we learned about the renovation of the 933 existing building when we renovated it in 2012, and spawned off of that information.
Okay, we thank you. Do you have something to add, sir? Okay, very
Here's my
good.
crutch.
That's fine. Okay, so are there any questions from the commissioners?
Am I on? Yeah, there we go. Bradley, I think that one of the nice things we could say is it's got a good scale about it and sort of a welcome scale. The 4-story, I think, is appropriate to the neighborhood. What maybe bothers me a little bit as it relates to some of the guidelines is the structural clarity. As expressed on this elevation, it seems like some parts are aligning and other parts are a little bit more haphazard in my mind. And then on the west elevation and the eastern elevation and maybe even the southern elevation, even though those are somewhat limited to street frontage, I think you can do better. And maybe as we get feedback from zoning and you look at it a second time, I would ask that you sort of reconsider what you're doing on those, maybe particularly the western elevation where it is visible.
Yes, sir.
And try to step that up a little bit.
That was a specifically, it was the final comment received from Lucinda. And once again, specifically with, well, actually both of those, but more so the west, where in order to preserve the opportunity to park, we are restricted by the setback on the transmission line, which hugs our property line. And in order to access those 6 parking spaces along that boundary, excuse me, we are again stuck in that catch-22 of having to preserve the opportunity for off-street parking or sacrifice that parking in order to close in and have more of a solid base to our building. So, this is what we chose to present. And yes, it is as a building base, not an extremely attractive, solid base to the building. I grant it. So we will see what we can do. And maybe if we are able to receive a variance that helps us achieve a better solution, then when we come back, it will be something that more closely parallels what the guidelines seek for compliance.
I understand that you've considered, in terms especially of the east and west elevations, as well as, I guess, the Pendleton Street elevation, since there are no retail spaces in the building, the street-level windows are not actually windows, correct?
Well, they are windows. It is glass.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to screen off the parking, we, well, I coined the term posterize them. If you see over on the 933 building, back when the Nickelodeon Theater was there, they actually did that with that big storefront window there, and they had a big poster in it.
Mm-hmm.
Advertising their movies. And I said, well, what can we do with these windows? And I went back when I took pictures of that building, and I used many details from that building and borrowed them for this building, trying to blend the two together architecturally. And they had that, and I said, well, that's something we could do as far as trying to assist us in screening off the cars from the pedestrians. And so scarfed a little detail or a little image of the Columbia skyline for this particular rendering and just pasted it in the windows, which is something we can do fairly easily as far as getting something in vinyl, applying it to the storefront windows to help us screen off the cars.
And the art's not a representation of what we're going to put in there.
Right, I understand.
It would be something, and this is
Suggestive.
Yeah, it's
right.
just, we'd hire an artist, we'd want.
Something that Lucinda said, and we would, do is it would be non-commercial in nature. Something historic or something, artistic, but non-commercial, so that it's not going to be,
So you would consider something of a mural or a mosaic?
Exactly so, sir. Something, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So that it would, it's not going to be rotate on a weekly basis. We're going to make money on it. No, we want, for us, it would be better that it was semi-permanent. That if it's something that, whatever the rotation would be is because the sun affects it or something like that, or it gets dated, or however, something we can work out that everybody understands. This is what it is. This is how it rotates. That kind of thing.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think that, as you've already said, as you've worked through what you're going to need to work through in order to take it to zoning, I would encourage you to really look at how many parking spaces you really feel you would need to eliminate in order to pull it together structurally in order to make the building form seem as if, that it more complies with the spirit of the guidelines. Because I think that reducing parking spaces is something that's actually correct me, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, but something that's encouraged in the guidelines in order for the building to meet the fabric of the, the intended fabric of the city center. And I agree with Ashby's comments that particularly the east and west, and of those two, particularly the west elevation, it really does not meet the spirit of the guidelines at all, and it'll be very, very highly visible. It's all two-story structures around there. It's facing a parking lot, so it will be very visible. I think that I would say that what we would need to see when this comes next time is three-dimensional images, because this 4-foot setback that you have along Pendleton Street, it really comes clear when you for instance, look at that, and when you realize that all of that stuff is way back in the center of the building. So you have this massive piece of 3-story building sitting on top of something that's very spindly, and it really kind of defies credibility from a structural standpoint. But it's particularly when you consider what the corner is going to look like, when you combine that with that. You've got just, a little spindly piece of brick sitting there in the corner. It obviously doesn't support the building. So I think that what I would suggest is that you look at what the proper building ought to be, how it's actually going to meet the ground, and see what parking that obliterates, and work backwards through it with staff to see where they think it's likely to be able to succeed with zoning. But I really believe that at the very least, we need to see three-dimensional images of this, because the staff needs to see it. I think the general public needs to see it as well, but even the commissioners, I think it will tell a really, really different story than the elevations do. And I agree with Ashby's other comments about making things line up more. I think there's just a basic, the bottom floor doesn't match the 3 stories above. They're just different animals, and I think that could be improved.
Yes, sir.
The last question I have, or the second question I have, and not knowing whether it's the last, is can you tell us a little bit about any utility equipment? Where would that be? Will it be on the roof? Do you plan to screen?
The parapet, and actually that is not the very last rendering I did, or is it? Is that the last? Is that the last where I dropped the parapet? I don't think it is, but maybe it is. And I didn't change those, but the Pendleton. Is that okay? Anyway, we will have HVAC equipment on the roof. We'll do split systems. The parapet should be enough to hide the mechanical equipment on the roof. It'll be DX, direct exchange, kind of like you would find anybody's home. You got the air handler out. The compressor outside, air handlers inside. Nothing massive.
Okay.
So nothing extreme as far as mechanical equipment.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions from commission? Is there anyone here who would like to speak in favor or opposition to the design request for 933 Main Street? Okay, that being the case, is there a motion, please, on the design approval for new construction?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion that we deny the certificate for design approval of 933 Main Street based on the comments, the denial of the site plan at this time, and awaiting zoning recommendations.
Thank you, Mr. Gressett. Is there a second? We have a second now on the motion to deny the design approval for new construction at 933 Main Street. Any further discussion?
I would only encourage the applicant to heartily take into account the comments that have been made, so that when we see it, when it comes back, it's substantively been improved.
Thank you. We have a motion, a second. Will you call the roll for a vote, please?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Grissett?
Yes.
Mr. Horger? Mr. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Nguyen?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Design approval has been denied for 933 Main Street. We hope to see you back. Next case, please, would you call, is for the Waverly Protection Area.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
No, we can't.
Good afternoon.
You'll have to speak up, ma'am.
The Waverly Protection Area has existed since 2005. Several years ago, they suffered a loss of an important building on Gervais Street, the George Elmore store, and that instigated some conversations between the neighborhood and ourselves to look at ways to offer stronger protection to Waverly. This is a loose drawing of the boundaries in yellow. And some other concerns that the neighborhood have to deal with some of the new developments that are ongoing to their boundaries, including in the small red square to the bottom left, which would be the station at 5 Points, the new student housing development there on the corner, and then to the east, the Gonzalez Gardens, which has plans for massive redevelopment in the near future. As you can see, Waverly is located in between these things and is bound on all four sides by fairly major downtown corridors: Hardin Street, Gervais, Millwood, and Taylor Streets. Despite that, Waverly has a unique identity in Columbia. It's probably one of our most significant African American neighborhoods, certainly one of the most significant neighborhoods in general. It was largely white when it was created after the Civil War, and then turned into an African American neighborhood of great prominence by the early 20th century. By 1989, that history was recognized by designation on the National Register of Historic Places, but after that time, it actually lost over 40% of its important buildings to demolition. The neighborhood did request a designation in 2005. This is just a map from 1895 showing that there was a great deal of development by the late 1800s, about 85 buildings on this map alone in this small area. When the district was created, there was interest in two separate sections to the district, including a residential core, which has been called Area A, and a commercial buffer zone on the exterior corridors, which is called Area B. At the time, both sections were given different sets of guidelines. So Area A had a lot to do with enclosures and additions, and Area B did not include demolition review, which is when part of the reason George Elmore store was demolished. There was no review from our office. These were the existing guidelines, or are the existing guidelines that we have for both areas. As you can see, there are some differences between the two. They are not very stringent. They do not review exterior changes. In fact, Waverly is our least restrictive protection area of all 15 historic districts that the city has. This is a picture of the store, George Elmore store, and as we discussed with the neighborhood some of their interests, it became clear that they were also concerned about losing historic materials on buildings. The bottom right is a picture of an older building that has gained many years ago, an altered porch with different columns, new windows, and new siding. As you can see, it's difficult to tell that this is actually an older building, but it is. So part of their concerns were to keep some of the character as best we could with a set of guidelines that would more comprehensively represent their current interests. These are just a few pictures of the various buildings in Waverly. It represents a huge difference in income levels and architecture throughout the district. The top right is Hills Grocery, which is currently in Area B, so it has no protection. But Waverly, as many historically black neighborhoods, has a collection of both commercial and residential buildings. This one also has 5 churches, a university campus, 2 health centers, and a Richland School District Administration building packed into a fairly small area. These are some other examples of the residential buildings here. The Good Samaritan Waverly Hospital is the top building. This was created during segregation, and that's part of the reason that Waverly is what it is because it was developed during a period of segregation when they created their unique, basically independent neighborhoods to cater to their own needs. This building is currently vacant, obviously, but it is also currently in Area B, so it has no protection from demolition, although it is listed on the National Register. In looking at what is Area B, we have found about 9 buildings that would be considered historic, that would be worthy of review should they be, should someone request demolition. These are listed or shown here on the map. When it became clear that the neighborhood was interested in not just having them saved from demolition, but also interested in keeping some of their character, the discussions progressed into keeping, into perhaps mixing the entire district into one thing and getting rid of the A and B areas. That would accomplish demolition review in Area B, but it would also allow the parking lot language from Area B to come over into what was formerly Area A, where you actually do have a number of churches and other things that have parking lots. So it seemed to serve a good purpose. So subsequently, this is the updated map that we are proposing, which is one solid district. There are some changes to the guidelines as well. In particular, of course, this is now one district, so everything here would apply to the entire district. But number 5, under Section A, things that we review, you'll see that we have added exterior changes to siding, windows, roofs, and porches. Almost 50% of the wood sided buildings have already gained vinyl siding. So we were not entirely restrictive against that in this language. We still retain some flexibility for people. They did want their windows retained. They have over 50% of the original windows. Roofs have been well maintained with original shapes and rafter tails. And then porches, over 60% have been altered. So the goal here would be to keep what's left. They also requested that we review signs. This would be on historic buildings or new construction. And then we have general maintenance and repairs listed, but that's essentially so that we can monitor projects and make sure that someone's idea of general maintenance matches our idea of general maintenance, so that we don't actually wind up with a window replacement, which some people might consider a maintenance issue. We still did not review painting and color, work not visible from the right of way, etc. That's all that I have for you. I would like to just note that we have held 3 meetings with the neighborhood that were organized by the city. Before that, we did meet with the neighborhood association itself. We have had 2 mailings out to every owner of record within the past few months to notify them about the meetings. And if you have any questions about this, I'd be happy to answer them.
Go right ahead, sir.
So on the slide that's up there now, I was just a little surprised that, and maybe this is in other districts, maybe it's not, but under B, painting and color, number 4, replacement of doors, and number 5, replacement of or removal of chimneys. I would have thought that all of those are sort of lend to the character of the area and maybe should be moved up to the upper group. But that's just my opinion.
Yes, thank you. We did do a survey of the city a few years ago. Of Waverly. There are not that many historic doors left in Waverly, and doors do not require a permit. So it is very difficult for staff to catch door replacements when they occur. there are some great historic doors still left, but it's a very small number. As far as the chimneys, we also look particularly at the chimneys in this neighborhood. And in Waverly, they're often a utilitarian appearance. They're not usually decorative or highly styled. And that's also another thing that often gets removed during the course of a roof job. It's not on purpose often, but if it's in disrepair. So we agree that they often do lend character, and we would like to see them retained, but given that so much has been lost already here, we're just trying to acknowledge what currently exists and what the challenges are.
Well, let me also ask, for full disclosure or clarification here, these changes are at the request of the neighborhood, is that correct?
Correct. So after the loss of the Elmore store, we were contacted by the neighborhood to start speaking with them about ways to add demolition review to Area B, which is where the Elmore store was. And that was probably, well, not that long after the demolition, 3 or 4 years ago. And so we have been speaking with them off and on, presenting to the neighborhood off and on. But this was formally requested by the Neighborhood Association in 2016 after meeting with them in the fall of 2015.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone here in the audience who would like to offer an opposition statement or one of support? If so, you can come up.
We do have a presentation by the applicant, Mr. Houston, the president of the Waverly Neighborhood Association.
Okay, please, if you would, sir, come forward. State your name as you come up, and please go right ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Frank Houston. I'm the president of the Historic Waverly Neighborhood and a resident of the Historic Waverly community, where my wife and I have lived in the community for the last 20 years. I also have a daughter who lives in Lower Waverly, who has lived there for the past 15 years. The Waverly Historic Neighborhood has asked for an overlay protection designation for Historic Waverly. With me are many of our residents, friends, supporters who are here with us, and there are others who have written letters in support of Waverly. For those residents and friends of Waverly, please stand.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
Some of them grew up in Waverly and lived in Waverly most of their lives, like our historian, James Baker. Additionally, there are those who lived in the area most of their lives and whose family have also had businesses in the area for many years, such as Dr. Noble Cooper, whose family's dentistry has been a part of Waverly community for years. Not only have they been an asset to Waverly, but also to the greater Columbia. We also have people like James Baker, our historian, as I mentioned earlier, who has lived there his entire life and who comes from a family of educators who have lived in Waverly for many years also. We also have Vivian Russell Baker, who's not present with us, but whose family has lived in the Waverly area since the 1912 on High Street. There is Darrell Drager, whose family members were pullers in the Waverly community. We have 5 churches in Waverly: Bishop Memorial EMA Church, St. Martin de Porres Catholic Church, St. Luke Episcopal Church, First Calvary Baptist Church, that came out of the Man Simon House in 1875, which was also originated under a Bish Harbor in 1865. And First Nazareth Church came out of First Calvary Baptist Church. First Nazareth Baptist Church owns about 20% of the Waverly community. And we as community needs to know what is going to happen with the property that they have acquired. Then there is Allen University that dates back to 1880 with its chapel administration building designed by John Anderson Langford, the U.S. first registered African-American architect in the 1920s. We also congratulate Allen University for the rededication of the Chapel Auditorium restored this past summer to its glory, and also dedicated the Bishop Norris Langford Hughes Library. The Waverly community has also been the home of several significant residents, including those of Robert H. Paul, co-owner of Owings and Paul Taylor in 1930, who built a Queen Anne-style home in Waverly, Reverend Robert W. Nance, who built his home on Pine Street in 1922. Reverend James M. Hinton in 1939. Barrett Bensaki, who bought his property in 1913. Moreover, Waverly was the childhood home, is where the childhood home of Federal District Judge Matthew Perry lived on Washington Street, and now is an empty lot. Benjamin Allen Blocker, a businessman, lived on Pine Street. George Garrett, vice president and professor at Allen University in 1930, lived at 2116 Pine Street. Civil rights activist Ms. Majestica Monty Simpkins lived in Waverly, and she lived at 1215 Pine Street. Waverly was also the site of the Town and Tourist Motel in the 1960s, where the NAACP regularly met. Today, 1332 Pine Street is the site of Daddy Grace's parsonage. There is an empty lot on Gervais Street where once stood George Elmore's Five and Dime store. George Elmore was a civil rights activist like Mrs. Majestica Simpkins. This historical site then we have the historical site of the Good Samaritan Waverly Hospital, which until 1973 was the only hospital blacks had to go, and now it is an empty building, where many of those that I just named were born in that particular hospital. At 1321 Oak Street, now it's also an empty lot, once stood the home of Mrs. Queen Abel Reese, who was an educator, and her husband John, who was a construction contractor, who bought in Waverly and lived there until their death. These individuals and many more are those who historically impact and created a thriving, self-sufficient Waverly community that we want to preserve and recognize. This historical 5-block Waverly neighborhood is the oldest African-American community in Columbia. As you can see, the Waverly community once thrived with some of the most affluential doctors, teachers, lawyers, entrepreneurs in Columbia. They were involved and proud of their community, just as we are today. This predominantly black neighborhood is characterized by its diverse architecture and irregular-sized lots. The Queen Anne, the Craftsman, the Colonial Revival influenced residents were all part of the fabric of Waverly woven together. These early documented dwellings, like the Hyatt Russell House of 1879, from vernacular, transitional, Greek Revival, Italianate houses, to various 2 and 2.5 story Queen Anne residences, and the smaller lateral gable central entrance dwelling, shotgun houses, bungalows, they were all documented and recognized by the National Register of Historical Places. What still remains of this community we are obligated to save, like the Hill Grocery Store and the Good Samaritan Hospital. We stand here today wanting to reclaim and restore all of the abandoned lots and structures, while being concerned also about crime in our neighborhood, and also having a relationship with the Columbia Police Department. Our historic Waverly neighborhood mission statement is as follows: keeping our architectural integrity with the historic Waverly community overlay protection, the Waverly historic neighborhood wants its remaining structures to retain their essential physical and visual features. This allows the structures to convey its historic identity with its elements of the past. We are trying to preserve the past for future generations. This community, the historic Waverly Neighborhood District, encompasses the African American experience from the transformation of an all-white plantation community to a community of black professionals. The structures in this community are diverse and different, from shotgun houses to bungalows to, again, single stories and two-story houses with architectural and historical significance. New construction in the community will show the transformation over time. There is history in our vacant lots where these houses once stood. Many of our vacant lots are a direct result of demolition because of crime, poverty, and neglect. Demolition occurs after the period of significance. When we identify the houses that once stood on these vacant lots and who lived there, it will give us a part of the past history of the historic Waverly community. And for all of the above reasons, we must preserve that which is left of its historical integrity. Our desire is to make historic Waverly, Columbia a more attractive, desirable place to live. We can accomplish this by having in place the Waverly Protection Area Design Guideline, which will be significant to Columbia's first suburb. With guidelines in place, there will be criteria and standards that the Design Development Review Commission must consider in determining the appropriateness of purpose worked within the historic Waverly District. Our goals are to maintain residential character, to encourage new resident design that is compatible with historical Waverly pattern of design, to preserve historic Waverly structures to tell the story of the community, to encourage orderly development along adjacent corridors that will enhance our residential core. I have given you a synopsis of our neighborhood, and we are not asking much, but we are asking you to let us hold on to what is left of its historical architectural character that is in the historic Waverly community. By having guidelines in place, the Design Development Review Commission will be able to determine the architectural style, the site, the building mass, the facade, its height, its setback, and the rhythm of opening, the roof lines, the materials that will be used. What we are asking you for is not much. It is something we did not just think of yesterday, last week, or a month ago. We have had many meetings concerning the Waverly Protection Overlay. The request for this protection overlay started in 2005 and again in 2012. 2005 and 2012. When Mrs. Hildebrand was the president of our neighborhood. After many meetings this year, Waverly Neighborhood requested that the Planning and Review Commission move forward. We approached the City of Columbia Historic Preservation Office Planning and Development Service to amend the Waverly Neighborhood Protection Overlay. And as the current president, I sent a letter to the commission asking that they move forward with the overlay protection. I would like others in the neighborhood to expound more on what it means for us to preserve what is left of historic Waverly and its significance, and what can be done to restore and rebuild this historic district with character. Thank you, gentlemen.
Let me turn my mic on. Thank you very much, Mr. Houston. I will ask if there is anyone here in opposition to this request, but let me say I commend you on a very thorough and eloquent presentation here. There's no doubt Waverly is a very significant and important feature or neighborhood within the city of Columbia, and its history is well written and preserved in many ways. Excuse me. Certainly, Ms. Hildebrand, who you mentioned, is someone much loved. We as a commission have her at our heart, and the loss of she and now recently the loss of her husband is also, I know, very much at heart for everyone in the neighborhood. I spoke to Assistant Chief Kelly just last evening, and he wasn't aware that this was a request coming forward, but I know he too lives in Waverly, and he too expressed interest in what's about to be decided here. Is there anyone here who would like to speak in support? I know there are a lot of you here. We are limited with time, but is there anyone, especially now that we've had such an eloquent presentation? I'm going to ask that we limit those who want to speak in favor after we've had such a great presentation to just 3 persons, and then we'll ask for anyone in opposition to come forward.
My name's Betsy Camerlin. I'm a landscape architect, and I used to serve on this commission as well. I think it's really critical that this be passed to get a cohesive neighborhood overlay district. The fact that the corridors where thousands and thousands of people travel each day are less protected does not make any sense to me. Approving this and allowing review, especially for demolition of properties, is critical. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. State your name.
Honorable members of this commission, I'm Seth Rose, and I have the honor of representing the Waverly neighborhood on Richland County Council. And I'm here today to speak in support of the overlay protections that the neighborhood is requesting. As you are aware, there's other neighborhoods in Columbia that enjoy these protections, such as Shandon, Heathwood, Earlwood, Elmwood, Cottontown, among others. And this is desperately needed for the Waverly community. I can tell you I've known Mr. Houston and other members that are present here today that live in the Waverly neighborhood for some time, And they are people, they are top-notch quality people, and they're here with the best interests of the neighborhood. And I submit to you that if it's in the best interest of Waverly, it's in the best interest of the city of Columbia. And we are fearful that if this is not passed here today, that it could ultimately be the death bell for this historic neighborhood. I thank you for your service, and I urge you to pass this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Good evening. My name is Tina Marshall Bradley, and I thank you for allowing me to speak today. My husband and I took positions in Columbia approximately 15 years ago, and we purchased a cute little house at the corner of Washington and Heights Street. Recently, Brad and I recommitted ourselves to working closer with our neighborhoods. We have become more active in the neighborhood association, and we are working with the current leadership on neighborhood initiatives. We volunteered to build Historic Waverly's website because we wanted others to see all of the amazing things that we learned about the neighborhood. During a recent meeting this past summer, a speaker from the Planning and Historic Preservation Division told a story about erecting a historic marker in our community, only to come back the next week and the building had been demolished. I was so frightened and saddened by the story that I rushed home and grabbed my 2 grandchildren, I need you to see them, Alyssa and Isaiah, who were visiting with us from Massachusetts, and we rushed out to show, and I showed them the Edwin Russell House, which is located at 1240 Heights Street. For those of you who may not know, the Edwin Russell House is the home of Edwin Roberts Russell, who was a research scientist directly involved in the Manhattan Project. Simply reading the historic marker in front of the house sparked deep and meaningful conversation that holds personal meaning for my grandchildren and I. And ladies and gentlemen, that is just what we learned on one rainy summer afternoon in front of one house on my street. Historic Waverly is a precious resource to Columbia, the state of South Carolina, the United States, and the world. The young people who come to this community to study at Allen University specifically, but Benedict College and the University of South Carolina also should be exposed to the history of this community. For the short period of time that they are studying in this environment, this living experience provides a tremendous transformative opportunity for them. It is our responsibility as global citizens to do everything in our power to preserve the milieu of this community for the next generation. Whatever monetary, emotional, or human capital that is at our disposal, it is our moral, social, and civic responsibility to preserve the integrity of this amazing community. The residents of Historic Waverly ask that you vote for the Waverly Protection Area Design Guidelines. Thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, ma'am.
I might suggest it
ma'am.
might be useful to ask if there's anyone here in opposition to the proposal.
Yeah, I have done so. I guess it didn't come forward clearly. Is there anyone here in opposition who would like to speak in opposition to the request? Sir, please.
My name is Ray Bryson. We own the property at the corner of Taylor and Millwood, the old Bundricks facility. The issue here from a commercial corridor property owner is the balance between residential and commercial. It's no one's going to argue that the history and the sentiment for that is deserved, but what is happening and happened to us is that this was a year and a half ago, we had a tenant moving into the old Seta towing facility, and he was a short-term 3-day storage guy to keep vehicles and then move them out to whatever disposition they had made. Well, unbeknownst to us, the residents opposed using that facility for that, even though we offered to change the building, put windows in, shrubbery, change the driveways. And the city came, actually assisted the residences. They went back and found that the previous tenant we had did not have a business license. So they told our family that we're responsible for making sure people have their business license. So therefore, our 12-month window had ran out, and we can no longer use that facility for that. Well, that, in our opinion, is going too far. That's limiting and crushing us commercial guys from doing anything with our facilities. Now, further to that, after that hearing, I think there was 4 people there that day, one of the ladies came up to me and said, "We want to see your property turned into a neighborhood park." That was just an eye-opening and scary statement to us because I think that's unreasonable. I think the challenge here is balance between allowing the commercial guys to start doing something with that corridor area, which is most of the area in the district. So I really wasn't aware that we were going to get rid of that until the third meeting. And what that does to us commercial guys, it muddies up the water when everything is put under one umbrella, because a sharp lawyer is going to argue that it's all one big area and perhaps it should all be residential only is where we're headed. So today that facility is still empty. It's terrible, but our family has tried 3 times to improve it, to develop it, and we've been told we can't do that, which I don't think is a good balance.
Thank you, sir, for offering your perspective. All right, we've had quite an opportunity to hear both sides. Is there any discussion from the commission? Anyone else here in opposition?
Hear more approvals, folks speaking for it.
Is there anyone who desperately feels the need in favor of this request? Please state your name.
My name is David Barry. I'm a contractor, build homes. I wasn't going to speak on this subject, but one area, it's not an opposition. I am in huge favor of keeping historic houses, homes, buildings, commercial, residential. Our company has worked very hard at trying to help that within Columbia. One concern that I have is how the new construction criteria would be written up in this neighborhood and what type of architectural definition would be set in place to allow new construction that would, fit the neighborhood, but not necessarily be something that we're trying to replicate 1920s, 1940s, 1960s homes. Is there any area of opportunity to build something that when people 50 years from now would see there's a home that was built in 2016? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Staff can just let you know that there were no requests made to change any of the new construction guidelines, so they stand as they always have.
As they have been, considering that it is a protection area.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you. Sir?
Good afternoon. My name is Louis Dessau. I'm a resident of historic Waverly. I work at the University of South Carolina. I've been a resident for about 10 years. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to present some information in regard to the affordability of rehabilitation, short-term and long-term. In the short term, with or without the proposed protection, there are guidelines that are set forth by the city as to how the upkeep should be done, guidelines that the police department has on their website and is enforcing. One of the concerns in the previous meeting that we had was that what was being proposed would involve substantial increases in costs. And I respectfully disagree with that. I did some research, and for a $150,000 home, it is estimated that maintenance would be about $2,000. For a $75,000 would be about $1,000 a year. That is quite affordable for people who have those types of homes. In the midterm, an investment in Waverly can be very attractive. Personally, property that I purchased was abandoned. It's number 52 right up there. Cost about $52,000. We invested $75,000. The house is worth in excess of $150,000. Our experience has involved over 12 homes that have been restored in the Columbia area, none of which have been resold. In the long term, historic districts like Waverly see an increase in the value of property rather than a decrease. Owners are making a good investment by either buying or maintaining their properties. It is our hope as a neighborhood that by implementing the proposed changes, this will keep up with our marketing objectives, which are to try and interest alumni of both Benedict or Allen to come back in a way similar to what the University of South Carolina has done. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Ma'am, please state your name and
I'm
please.
Anna Redwine. I'm here on behalf of the Coalition of 5 Points Neighbors, and I'll keep it really quick. The Coalition of 5 Points Neighborhoods is dedicated to supporting the healthy growth and development of the neighborhoods surrounding the 5 Points commercial area. We also work to protect the quality of life of these residential areas from any negative commercial encroachment, including any measures that encourage absentee home ownership over occupied housing. Our coalition includes Hollywood Rose Hill, Lyons Street, Melrose Heights, Shandon, University Hills, Wales Garden, Waverly, and Wheeler Hill. We urge you to support Waverly's request to adopt updated historic protection guidelines for the historic Waverly neighborhood. It's extremely important to expand the guidelines to ensure that encroachment on the historic core does not continue to erode its integrity. Currently, there is a district overlay, but is divided into 2 areas. These 2 areas need to be consolidated into one comprehensive historic district. As you're aware, this neighborhood, along with Martin Luther King neighborhood in Lower Waverly, has seen an increase in absentee ownership and commercial interest over the last decade that are real threats to the character of these communities. Your decision is critical to protecting this area so that it can thrive in the future. Our coalition urges you to remember that the concerns of the people who actually live in the neighborhoods should take precedence over any commercial or financial interests that would disrupt lives and dramatically damage the collegiality and sense of community that this neighborhood currently enjoys, but is precipitously close to losing. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else who would like to speak? We have now the opportunity as a commission to deliberate or ask questions if there are any. Very good. If there's no discussion, then we'll have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I think we all applaud the efforts, the interest, the leadership of these neighbors and friends. And with that, I offer a motion that we recommend for approval the amended guidelines for the Waverly Protection Area.
Actually, that would be a recommendation to council as well as the map.
I was just about to say that this is not an approval per se. It is that we're recommending.
Okay, a move to recommend.
Very good, sir. Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion to recommend to council the
guidelines and the map.
The guidelines and map for combining both areas A and B of Waverly neighborhood. Is there any discussion? No further discussion. Will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Gressett?
Yes.
Mr. Herger? Yes. Mr. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Wynn?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. We're glad to see each and every one of you. Thank you. Very nice.
The next project is 1721 Gadsden Street. This is a Group 3 individual landmark, which is, happens to be located in the Arsenal Hill neighborhood. This is a circa 1883 house that has endured several changes over the years, including the enclosure of the front porch. It was used as an African-American home for many years and is part of the enclave there of African-Americans. It appears that behind the...
Excuse me, folks. We have deliberation still continuing. If you'll close the back door, please.
They're excited.
Thank you.
Thank you. It appears that behind the enclosed porch that the front wall was removed, so we don't really have a lot of information within the building itself about the original configuration, but the goal is to open back up the porch and install a new front wall. In a 1919 Sanborn map, you can see the unusual double bays that are found on this building represented here. It appears that the bay closest to the street is likely an addition, given the difference in the foundation and the windows. Our recommendation is that, they're also asking for approval for the Bailey bill. Our recommendation is for approval for both with several conditions. One of them is that as we look at other examples of cottages in the Arsenal Hill neighborhood, we note that there does not seem to be paired windows, which is what's being recommended by the project here. You'll notice on the front that there's a central door flanked by doubled windows. It would appear the historic examples typically had either a single window or two single windows. Given the somewhat narrow size of this house, it is likely it perhaps only had single windows flanking the door, so that is staff's recommendation. Another recommendation is that the columns that are proposed to be 10 inches, that those would actually be reduced in size to a maximum of 8 inches. So recommendation is approval as it complies with section 17674D of city ordinance with those changes, as well as potentially adding a transom or side lights to the door, as that was a common feature in the area, that the foundation not gain any paint or parge coat on the non-coated brick, although the foundation or the non-original bay could be changed. And then any original windows would be repaired and restored if they can be. And then, of course, if any historic details are discovered during demolition affecting the proposed facade or porch arrangements, that those alterations can be worked out with staff. You can see on the drawings presented that there are some changes going to go on to non-original windows. There are actually only a few original windows that we found left on the building. They're indicated here by the red arrows. And we also recommend approval for the Bailey bill with the same conditions. Are there any questions for staff?
Go ahead, sir.
Is this on? I think, Stacy, I just missed something where you say that any additional transom or side light detail for the front door be worked out with staff. Is there one being proposed in the design now, or did I miss that?
No, I'm sorry, that there is not one being proposed, but when we look at historic examples around the area, since we are asking them to remove the two extra windows, if they were to want more light perhaps in that area, it would be appropriate to have glass near the door, such as in a transom or side light. So if y'all agree with that assessment, we could work out that detailing at staff level.
But you're not recommending that they do that. It's just that if they were to do it, to leave it to work out with staff.
Correct. So
Okay.
they would not have to come back for another approval for that detail.
And the other question is about the foundation, that it not be painted or get a parge coat. Are they proposing that it does get one of those?
Yes, in one of the drawings of a side elevation, it mentioned repairs to part of the brick, and then the brick would receive, on elevation A-2.03, it may be small in yours, but it says to patch and repair existing foundation wall and paint or parge. So we would just recommend that if it is original brick that has not been painted, that it would not gain any sort of masking coat.
Thanks. Somehow I missed some of the details on this application.
Is the applicant here? And if so, would they like to come forward? Thank you, Stacy, for your presentation.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dale Marshall, and this is Maureen O'Hare, who is the owner, and she and her husband are the people looking to restore
Dale,
the house.
make sure we can get your
All right.
voice recorded. Thanks.
So, it's largely a judgment call on the front. I mean, we think that there may be some elements of the original roof still there in the porch. There's also, there are multiple layers of ceilings, but there is some evidence of some beadboard up there. And so it's possible that the actual roof from the original porch may be hiding there under what's been enclosed. We really have no evidence as to where the stairs were originally. The porch work, I would guess that the porch work that's there now started probably somewhere in the 40s. So, I mean, we're looking at stuff that's probably going back close to 75 years old in terms of there's actually a poured brick porch, with a concrete slab. So my guess is the timeline is that you got the brick columns on the corners and the poured brick and moving the stairs over to the left side. I would guess somewhere in the 40s. And then you had a couple of enclosure projects, that could have happened somewhere in the 50s to 70s. There actually is a planter in what would have been the front wall of the house where they simply took out the entire front wall and put an interior planter. So we think that probably predated closing in the porch or happened, but it's really hard to tell. So we've more or less made a speculative guess on the front porch and the windows because we can't find any photographic evidence and really we don't even have wall framing that's preserved to allow us to guess where the openings might have been. And so we're creating a center hall in the front. There's a center hall existing behind the front room. So we are sort of opening that up into the front and turning the foyer on the left, or turning the room on the left into a foyer that's open. I don't think that the owner has any objection to the idea of going to single windows. We certainly could do that. I will say that I don't know that there's a complete lack of historic precedence in 1890s college repaired windows. I think we could find some examples of that, but I don't sense arguing over it. We think maybe we have the original front door. This is the door that's currently on the front of the porch. There is another house in the neighborhood that has a similar door, and it's kind of bizarre, so it doesn't seem like something that would just come out of a catalog somewhere in the last 50 years at least. So our thoughts are that maybe that was the original front door, but we again have no actual evidence of that, but our proposal is to move that. We could put it in with the transom. I don't think we can do side lights because we really are only about 7 inches off the wall to what we're trying to create as a bedroom on the right. So unless we move the door off center, we wouldn't be able to do side lights, but we could put a transom over it. There are probably about half and half houses around the neighborhood that have the transom. So I don't think we have any objection to the idea of doing that. I don't particularly have an objection to an 8-inch column, although again, I don't know that you look at the house next door, which is also on the Sandburn map from 1819, and it looks to have about 12-inch columns. So I'm not sure exactly, that there is an absolute, but if the staff wants an 8-inch column, I don't think we have an objection to going from a 10 to an 8-inch column.
Can I interrupt just to ask a question while he's on that? On the perspective that you drew, what was the size of those columns? Were those 12?
Those are 10s. What's shown on the drawings right now are 10-inch columns. At least the girth of the column is 10. I mean, the base and the capital is a little bigger, but that's a to scale 10-inch, which is the same. It's rabbit. So it's the
And
same.
I think you should use your judgment about the proportion of the column to the height of the porch. That certainly doesn't seem that to me. It's beginning to get a little spindly. I wouldn't go less than, certainly wouldn't go less than 8. 10 or 12 would suit me better.
Again, we don't want to engage in a lot of back and forth. I mean, nothing that staff raised is particularly objectionable, but, we were using judgment to get where we were, but we also, the owners very much want to qualify for the Bailey bill, so they don't want us to do anything that pushes that review.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Dale, good to see you. Ma'am, would you like to add anything? You're welcome to do so.
Okay, well, my name is Maureen O'Hare, and we are actually somewhat new to Columbia after spending more than 30 years in Denver. So we moved here, and we moved down to Canal Side and just walked around the area and just kept falling in love with this house. And so we really think that it just has a special charm, and it spoke to us, so we're excited about doing the right things and keeping the historic value and being part of the neighborhood.
Excellent. Great, thank you. Is there anyone here who would like to speak in support of this application? There are actually 2 applications we'll be making motions on. One is for the Bailey bill, and the second is for the design approval or request. Is there anyone here who would like to speak in opposition? Any discussion or other questions from the commission? Please.
I guess this question might be for Dale, but either of you. You mentioned many things that you don't take particular exception to from the staff recommendations. I actually agree with everything, your sentiment, but I think and I also agree with Ashby's concern about the column proportions. I think, to me, you cited the house next door. These columns look like they're reasonably proportioned to me. If you're willing to do single windows rather than the double windows, I mean, there are double windows right next door. But, if you're willing to do that, then that's fine, that's good, as far as I'm concerned. But I guess my other question is, there were some other things on here, I think, that were staff recommendations that you didn't specifically talk about, like the foundations, the paint, or parge, or not? Is there anything else in here that you...
If you walk around the house, the foundation there's a combination of painted block, two or three different bricks, some painted, some not painted. I mean, my thought was simply to paint it all one color. I mean, there's some of it is painted and some of it isn't. We weren't looking to paint the front porch or anything like we are intending to preserve the concrete front porch just because it's really well built, even though I don't think it's original to the house. We weren't intending to paint that, but I was just trying to get a consistent finish on the stuff that's going around, and there's some places where there's some fairly big gaps in it looks like I did the masonry work instead of a mason, so we were just trying to clean that up a little bit. But we're flexible on that. I mean, it's not a tall foundation. It's not highly visible. The house is 3 to 5 feet off the property line, so there's very little that you're going to see down the side. But that was why we made that note, was just trying to clean things up. I personally would like to have the flexibility on the columns to let us see what actually we find in terms of a porch beam and exactly what height we get left with and some of those things, and not be locked into something. I'm fine on the foundation that we would agree not to paint any historic brick, but if it's a piece of concrete block or something that's there, we might prefer to paint it versus leaving some exposed concrete block.
So if there were original brick that was not currently painted, to leave it unpainted and differentiate between new work and the original in that way?
I think at some point there was probably piers, and then the piers have been infilled with sort of scrap brickwork, and I, right off the top of my head, can't remember whether we actually have unpainted piers with painted infill or whether it's a random mix. But we're flexible on that, but, you know, and again, I would like some flexibility maybe on the columns to let us see what actually turns out to be up there this preserve, because we're not sure at this point, you know, how much of the front, if we can find useful structure in the front porch roof, we will certainly try to preserve it, but until you start taking it apart based on everything else that's been done, I can't guarantee you that it will be, you know, so.
So I think there's a reasonable request, and I agree that he should have some flexibility. We don't want to jeopardize the Bailey bill, but on the other hand, I think he's trying to use the best judgment as an architect.
To that point, one concern that I have in terms of the Bailey bill is that we're tying stipulations to something that's really fiction, and we've kind of generated this idea that there's certain standards, and yet we've admitted that this building has two bays that don't make any sense on this style. So I'm very hesitant to put into our motion things that are generated from comparisons that I'm not sure we have adequate information to make.
I'm sorry, who said that the bays do not match the style?
I believe your presentation indicated there was an unusual feature in a house of this style, and then the Sanborn map indicated those too.
Just for the neighborhood.
Okay.
Not of the style.
Are there any other comparable buildings with two bays like that you have elevations of for the front?
No, that's why we're saying this is unusual, but it's a
Stacy,
folk Victorian.
speak up.
But it is a folk Victorian, given the front gable and the bays, probably more so folk Victorian than other examples that were out there. So that informs a more delicate porch, and there are no other paired windows on this building. You'll notice paired windows on the adjacent building, which is 40 years younger than this, are found throughout the building. So those are some rules of thumb in architecture that we note through historic buildings and eras. As we've looked at thousands of historic buildings, there are patterns that emerge. So those are our best recommendations, and you're allowed to interpret them as you wish.
What year is this building?
It's probably around 1883.
Well, as I understand it, the applicant's willing to go to single windows anyway, so.
And for the foundation, it's largely covered by shrubs right now. So if you want to defer to staff and them to work out any issues with making it look more uniform, we're certainly willing to work with them on those details while trying to preserve as much as we can.
If I understood Dale correctly, what he would be interested in or willing to discuss is that any original brick that is not currently painted be remain the same as it is now, and then discuss treatment to any new construction that might make the new construction more uniform. And to me, just as a historic preservation, Department of Interior kind of thing, that's the sort of thing that you might expect to see anyway, is that the new construction is differentiated from the existing original construction. So that seems like it would be reasonable anyway.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion or questions? Is there a motion?
I'll take a shot at it. I move that we approve exterior changes, addition.
Because I'm not sure which one you're motioning on, let me just.
Not the Bailey bill.
Okay, very good. So this is for design.
Right, for design, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Approve the request for the certificate of design for exterior changes, addition, and for preliminary certificate, not for that, for exterior changes and the addition. Is that what we're doing? Okay. With the following, that the proposed paired windows on the facade be reduced to single windows, compatible in size with historic windows on the building, that any additional transom or side light detail for the front door be worked out with staff, that original masonry on the foundation walls that is not painted be left unpainted, and that any rework, any new materials in the foundation and treatment of whether they're painted or parged be reviewed and worked out with staff, that any original windows be repaired, but if beyond repair is determined by staff, that they be replaced in kind with wood windows matching the profiles of the original, and that any historic details are discovered during demolition affecting the proposed facade or porch arrangement, that alterations to the design can be worked out with staff. So I left the column part out on purpose. That's not part of the motion, though.
Okay, so we've got a motion with recommendations to be deferred to staff on the certificate or request for certificate of design approval. Is there a second?
Second.
We've got a second. Any further discussion? There being none, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Gressett?
Yes.
Mr. Herger? Yes. Mr. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Wynn?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Next, we'll have a motion request here for the certificate, preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill at 1721 Gadsden. Is there a motion?
I'll make that motion. Mr. Chairman, I move that we grant preliminary certification for the Bailey Bill under the following conditions proposed by staff. The project meet or exceed the 20% investment threshold requirements for qualified rehabilitation expenses. That all work meeting the standards for work as outlined in section 17-698. That the proposed paired windows on the facade be reduced to single windows as has been accepted by the architect in review. That any additional transom or side light detail for the front door be worked out with staff. That the foundation be worked out with staff on a case-by-case basis as was presented in the previous motion. That any original windows be repaired, but if beyond repair as determined by the staff, that they be replaced in kind with wood windows matching the profiles of the original. That if any historic details are discovered during demolition affecting the proposed facade or porch arrangement, alterations to the design can be worked out with staff, and all other details deferred to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. Is there a second on this motion for certificate or preliminary certification for Bailey Bill?
I'll second it.
We have a second. Any discussion? There being none, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Gressett?
Yes.
Mr. Herger? Mr. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
Yes.
Mr. Wynn?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, folks. That'll lead us to now the next case, which is at 1420 Haygood Avenue. Please note for the record that Mr. Savory is recusing himself from this particular case.
This is a part of a lot that will be subdivided from a parcel at 1420 Haygood Avenue, which currently has a non-contributing single-family home. Staff has already approved plans to alter the existing home to include the removal of the north part of the north addition and construct a new north wall. The purpose of removing part of the addition is to allow lot space for the construction of the new house. The applicant is proposing to construct a highly energy-efficient house called a passive house that will also produce some energy through items like solar panels on the roof. The house will be built from a panel system which has fixed openings and pre-installed windows from the manufacturer. This limits the flexibility of design options for the building. While staff certainly applauds energy-conscious construction, it should be noted that such efforts do not negate the guidelines that are in place for the historic district. Any new construction in the neighborhood has been held to the standards below, and these guidelines are the only items that the staff and the DDRC are allowed to consider when making a decision on new construction. Please note that the ongoing discussions have resulted in a couple of different plans, but I believe you only have the latest. I did not include the older ones, as I had mentioned here. This is the latest site plan provided by the applicant. To the north of this lot, which is on the left side of the proposed house, there is an abandoned roadbed that was never really built out as a street. The proposal would be to use this as part of the driveway, and then the parking would be in the rear of this house under a proposed prefab flat-roofed carport. Staff does not consider this carport to be in keeping with the guidelines but would request that you defer that to us so that we can review the visibility of it once we get a little further along and can maybe stake some things out to see how visible it will be. This is a proposed facade. It meets a number of the guidelines, including height, size, and scale, as well as massing, although it has a projecting bay on the right side, you can see here. That does not appear anywhere else in the neighborhood. The setback is appropriate. Sense of entry is appropriate with a porch and main entry on the facade. The rhythm of openings is fairly proportionate, except for a number of small windows on the south side that are much more numerous than are what are typically found. The roof shape as well seems somewhat proportionate to the area. Where staff has some concerns has to deal with the materials, texture, and details, which is number 9 under the guidelines for new construction. This guideline states that you should use materials, textures, and architectural features that are visually compatible with those of historic buildings on the block or street. When selecting architectural details, consider the scale, placement, profile, and relief of details on surrounding structures for the basis of design decisions. If horizontal siding is to be used, consider the board size, width of exposure, length, and trim details, such as corner boards on adjacent historic structures for specifications of the new material. Largely, this street has a mix of brick and mostly brick, but also some wood-sided buildings. There is a building several blocks to the south on Haygood with a mix of materials with wood shake on the first floor, about 2/3 up, and stucco on the top third, which is similar to what is being proposed here. There are some other features of the building, such as faux half timbering in the gable that are proposed. This is a building across the street that has some of the features similar to what's being proposed, such as the open framing on the porch roof. These are some other examples of 2-story houses on Haygood to get a sense of the window placements and materials that are evident on the street. And the bottom right here is the example of the wood shake and stucco house on Haygood. Some of the concerns come in with staff having to do with the windows. The windows that are proposed, let me scoot back to the drawing. The windows that are proposed that are paired do not have any sort of separation between them, any sort of mullion, which is what is clearly evident on historic buildings when windows are paired together, such as here you can see between the triple windows, there are 2 mullions between them. These are the vertical wood trim pieces between the window sashes. This is new construction, also on Haygood. The top 2 photographs showing that there was a mullion put between the 2 new windows on that. And then on the bottom picture is a building right across the street from that showing the mullion. Also on this house, the smaller arrow is pointing to the foundation. One of the other concerns we have is that the proposed house has siding that curves out at the base to go over the foundation. Our understanding is that that's because both of these materials are being applied to the same plane and the brick would be thicker than the siding. We would be proposing that there be a thinner brick veneer used or a stamped stucco or some alternate material, but perhaps the owner can speak to that in a few minutes. These are also some examples of buildings on Haygood. Some of them use the faux half timbering. You'll note that that is only found on small gables on the front or on side gables. It is not found on a 2-story. It is also generally not stretched across an entire facade as is being proposed. This is the current house on the bottom picture and some examples, some photos from the site showing what is proposed. These are also photos provided by the applicant. This is a specification sheet. The red line is my addition to the sheet to show you what is being proposed, which would be a wood single glazed upper sash that would be installed in the opening in front of a PVC casement window that would swing in, which is what you see to the right, which is the full casement with a drawn-in multi-light window to achieve sort of a craftsman effect. This situation would create a gap between the proposed wood window and the PVC windows, so right behind the red line at the bottom, you would see a small piece of wood is represented, that would be placed behind the window and scribed to the outline of the PVC window. This is approximately the same depth as the window, which would give the upper sash twice the depth of a normal historic window, and would push back, would show that the bottom sash looks a little more pushed back than normal. Some of the other concerns we have with this would be all the gasketing that is visible. These are some photographs on the right from staff from a historic wood window showing the differences that seem evident to us, especially on particularly the bottom two photographs for the center, where you can see a historic wood sash is a piece of wood and glass. It's usually about 2.5, 3 inches tall, maybe a little more. There's basically a double framing around the proposed PVC window that creates an unusual appearance that does not appear to be in compliance with the guidelines when it talks about using architectural details and considering the placement and profile and relief of those details. Again, this is more information about the proposed windows. You see the extra framing that they require, as well as the fixed wood sash that's being proposed. These are more specification sheets showing the sill. You see that basically it looks like a double frame system here. Similar all the way around. So our concerns would be the foundation issue, obviously the windows, the faux half timbering. The door that is proposed is, let me scoot back, is 4 feet wide, which is about a foot wider than typical. And the projecting bay does not seem, it's not found anywhere actually in the neighborhood. So those are a lot of concerns that we have. We are recommending approval if those concerns can be met. So our recommendation is for approval, as it generally meets some parts of Section 5 of the guidelines, but with the following conditions: that the carport is excluded from this approval and be deferred to staff so that we can determine visibility from the public right-of-way and make a decision for approval. That the proposed vinyl windows either be replaced with a window consistent with the guidelines, or that they be concealed entirely by an exterior window that meets the guidelines as determined by staff. That the paired windows gain a mullion between them, that at least one of the small windows is either removed or enlarged to a full size on the south wall, which is this wall here. That the gable's faux half timbering be removed. That any new gable vent detail must be reviewed by staff. The projecting bay to be removed. Front door be narrowed to a width similar to historic doors. That the curve at the base of the walls be removed. The foundation to retain a brick appearance but be minimized in depth in order to allow the siding or a skirt board to overlap the foundation in a way that is consistent with historic buildings, and that all details be deferred to staff. And do you have any questions for staff?
Well, there we go. Thank you, ma'am. I do have a question. We have apparently 2 letters, I believe,
You should have,
regarding this case. Is that
you
true?
should have at least 3 in front of you.
I'm sorry, yes, there is a third.
Those are 2 letters of support and 1 in opposition.
Okay. Do we need to have these read, or are they part of the record?
We do not always read the letters. We note that they have been received.
That's what I mean. You've noted that they've been received and,
Yes.
and they've been entered in. Okay. And we do have copies, and we have read them up here. All right, so is the applicant here, or any representative, please? How are you, sir?
Good, how are you?
Great.
All right, my name is John McLean. I'm the homeowner. I'd like to thank you for the chance to talk for a few minutes. Also want to point out that Stacy and I have worked back and forth on what you've seen today for more than a year, probably closer to 2 years. A lot of adjustments and changes have been made with her input. Appreciate her being clear and fair, even on items that we've discussed that she's, again, recommended that it be changed. So I do think it would probably make a little sense to just give you a little bit of a background. I think there's going to be a number of neighbors that come and have a chance to share their thoughts. So I've lived in the neighborhood a number of years. This is actually the second house that I've owned in the neighborhood. 3 years ago, I purchased this property and still had another house over close to Dejura High School that I couldn't sell at the time, rented it, and so when I purchased this house, the intent was to see if I could do this. That being contingent upon whether or not I could sell the other house. So for a while, I was sort of hung up on what my options were. The other house sold, and the process I had started was really just to have my goals are threefold: to build a house that my family can enjoy, that fits in with the neighborhood, a house that is a net zero house, meaning the sum of all the energy bills from SCE&G throughout the course of the year add up to $0, and then to have the house be something that I can afford. I think there's a lot of talk about net zero houses these days. People look at them and say, hey, that's a great idea. But then if you actually look at the houses that are net zero, they have a tendency to be $300-400 a square foot, which is great if you could just pay until you're have it. So to try to find a system that I can use that provides me enough flexibility, but also has enough standard components that it doesn't cost an arm and a leg, is really one of my key items. There is a slide that's not in this presentation that I actually want to start with. It's in the PDF that's been was posted online, and I don't know if you have access to that. It's page 15. So have you seen this online or in the? I gather you haven't all seen it. Everyone's nodding except. Can you give that to Ashby? Okay. So the crux of the panel system is that it's a blank canvas. The inside you can put whatever you want. I propose 1/2-inch sheetrock, and on the exterior you can put whatever sort of material you want as well. Typically it uses a rain screen system, so you put furring on the outside. So the only portion of the system that is visible is the windows. We're probably going to talk a lot about the windows during the next, hopefully not too long of our lives, but we're going to talk about the windows. So the deal with the windows is, from my understanding of the guidelines is that for the project, it needs to be something that's compatible with the neighborhood, but it is a house built in 2016. The energy performance should be a house that wouldn't be possible in the 1930s when all the neighboring homes were built, and that it be something that, but it doesn't need to emulate. It doesn't need to be a perfect replication. This is not a house that's applying for the Bailey Bill where we try to match something according to the Secretary of Interior standards, where you have to match, everything. So the intent that we had at the beginning of the process, when I started talking to Stacy a couple of years ago, was to have something that had more of a mix of maybe some contemporary details. The farther we got into it, I really realized the best path forward is really just to try to make this house to look as close to an arts and crafts house as possible. So a lot of this is completely up to discussion. The challenge of the windows, and I feel like possibly Stacy and I are both somewhat hamstrung on this, is that the windows, they come as part of this standard system. I mean, when they arrive off the truck, they set them, and the window, it's a triple pane window, and it's triple glazed. It's triple pane and triple gasketed, so it essentially leaks no air, which is really important for a house of this sort in our hot, humid climate. But if you try to put a different window in, or you try to do something other than the windows that come with the system, basically they say, here's your panel, and you can put whatever window you want inside. And that really makes what I'm trying to do, that's a whole different kettle of fish. It's totally different. So the idea that I had, I am an architect. I work at Watson Tate Savory, and my idea from my past experience on working on historic buildings on the campus at USC and on the Horseshoe and other National Registry buildings was, okay, so one of the key elements of a double hung window is that you have two different planes of glass. The upper sash is the outer plane, and the lower sash is set back. And often when you see windows that are trying to replicate double hung, they just put applied buttons to it, and all the glass is obviously in the same plane. And so one advantage I had with these windows, and part of the reason I went with this system is it's unusual because it is an in-swing casement window. So I was like, well, I can put an exterior fixed true divided light historic sash on the exterior of it, and that's what this is showing. The intent of that was not to save money or do it on the cheap. The intent was to try to be respectful of the adjacent houses in the district, but also meet my three goals, which are affordability, net zero, and a house that my family would enjoy. That would be that would fit in with the neighborhood. That is kind of, I feel like I've sort of taken this concept and pushed it as far as I can. The distance, and to Stacy's point, absolutely a discerning eye walking up to the house, specifically from the front porch. If you're standing on the front porch, you would notice that the exterior painted glass and the interior painted glass, or what you're trying to see is the top sash and the bottom sash, they're about an inch farther apart than they would be in a traditional, wood window. The only thing that I could possibly adjust with this upon reflection over the last few days is I could take a notch out of the corner of the window where the wood window, and conceivably slide it back another 3/4 of an inch, a little bit less than 3/4 of an inch. So instead of having the distance between the glass, currently it's about 1 9/16, it would be back, less than an inch. That's a change that could be made. That could be an improvement to make it look a little bit more. As far as what appears the lower sash, which is actually the bottom half of the casement, in-swing casement window, it's a casement window. It's going to look like a casement window to a certain point. Stacy has, one of her comments was to basically replace the windows with either a painted wood window or an aluminum clad window. From the starting point, I would say that an aluminum clad window is not that much more historic than this casement window that's proposed. Another option that has been offered has been to just cover the entire window, basically put a wood double hung window on the outside and then have my in-swing casement on the inside. And my feeling is that's a little onerous. What's the beat mean? I have 1:30 left. Okay, so I'm just going to tick through these then. The carport, it's as hidden from the house as I can get it. I can paint it black. The challenge of screening it is how much screening will ever be enough screening. I've tried to put it in the least visible spot. We've talked about the windows, the paired windows, gain a million between them. The challenge of that is the windows that come with the system, they're molded together in the factory, and they're airtight in the factory. One of the small windows on the south facade that's up there, I actually sent Stacy a photo with the upper right window. The house has 3 bathrooms. Those 3 windows line up with 3 bathrooms. And then I emailed her later in the following morning after my wife says, that's where I put my makeup on, and I don't want to put it on with just the light. I want a window in there. So I'm here asking for the third window. I feel like the rhythm of this facade is, it's a vernacular sort of style. I feel like the rhythm of the windows is fairly set. It seems to match the rest of the neighborhood. The gable vents, I'm happy to work that out with Stacy. The projecting bay, absolutely. There's not another house on Haggett Avenue that has a projecting bay. The intent of the massing, I'll stop there. Okay. The intent of the massing on item number 3 is page 2. It says breaking up uninteresting box-like forms into smaller and various masses is essential to maintaining the character of the streetscape. Do not construct single monolithic forms that are not relieved by variations in massing. I mean, if you tell me I can't do it, you'll certainly save me a few bucks, but I feel like that is a more interesting facade. I feel like the composition of it is stronger, and so that's why I went ahead. So I haven't had a chance to really get into the details of the staff comments below, but I'd be happy to take your comments or questions.
Thank you, sir. Any questions or comments from the commission?
I would have a few comments, I guess. I'm appreciative of your sort of interpretive style, trying to fit into the neighborhood. I don't think it has to be 100%, as you stated, the Bailey Bill criteria. That I think it's really more of an effort to apply this new system of 2016 and, make it work as best you can. And I applaud you for that. I agree with most of your design attempts. I'm a little questioned about the 4-foot front door. That was really the only one that bothered me. I like the flare at the bottom. I like the bay window to break the mass up. The mullion in the middle of the pairs of windows. What? You were showing a 4-foot door.
I was, and
which to me was a little.
That could easily be.
I thought that was a little wacky, but
my wife and I drive past houses on the way to Divine Street, where there's a couple houses in Old Shannon. They have 4-foot doors, and I just kind of like them. A lot of my inspiration in the houses I like in this style are green and green, and they have a tendency to have kind of wide doors.
Yeah.
But
if there was a good reason for doing it, maybe you could talk me into it. But most of those things, I think, you were right on.
Just as a reminder, we like a lot of things about the designs, and we appreciate the efforts that they make. But when you actually make a decision from the DDRC, it must be based on the guidelines. So if you like something, you need to find a way that it meets the guidelines, and you're welcome to interpret that differently than staff. But liking an item is really not a legally defensible argument for the DDRC. Not really. It's a general statement, it's opinion, which I appreciate, but everything really needs to tie back.
You'd mentioned the flare in the siding. I feel like I'm sort of stuck between a number of options. I felt like this was the best one. The idea of the installation of the house is there's a continuous 4-inch insulation that runs all the way down to the top of the footer, and so you have basically this continuous plane from footer all the way up to the roof. And if you've got siding up here, brick is obviously thicker. So my options are a sloped Roloc, which draws more attention to it.
Staff recommended a 1/2-inch brick veneer or something thinner that might work. Have you explored that option at all?
I'm not aware of a 1/2-inch brick veneer product that is suitable below grade. I'm afraid what we would end up with is either a steel sheet or something that I and the neighbors might say that looks like trailer home skirting. That's the challenge that I have. The other option is some sort of. If that's the feeling of the people on the commission, then I guess I'll be doing some research on skirting. But that's the reason that it flared out, and I think there are historic examples of the flare.
Mr. Powell, did you have something?
No, thank you.
Okay. So if there, Mr. Falconer, no? All right, so we have no further discussion at this point or questions from the commission. Is there anyone in the audience here who would like to speak either in favor of or in opposition to this application?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And you'll be welcome to any rebuttal if you so choose. Yes, sir.
Hello, I'm Mike Hopkins. I live directly across from the proposed construction. And when we made the area a historical district, I was under the impression that the houses would really blend. And
Pull that mic towards you, if you will, please.
Okay. I was under the impression that the houses would really have to blend in, such as the two that are just being completed on Haygood. They're one block down. They look just exactly like all the other homes. Not identical, but they blend in, and 2 years you won't be able to tell they're new homes. This house, with the goal of having energy efficiency, is fine. All of us would like to have energy efficiency, but we're constrained on old houses about what we do to put up storm windows or to replace our windows. We are constrained by all of the regulations, and I see no reason that because someone chooses to use manufactured panels, that this turns out to be a problem and he can't follow the regulations when all of the other people who are currently already living in established homes have to follow the regulations. The house also, it will not be a contributing house to the historic district. It is the narrowest house in the area. It's only 30 feet wide. It is closer to the street than any other house on Haygood Avenue. When the trees are all cut down for the solar panels, that house will be the distinctive house on the block in an historical area, and it'll be a non-historical house. And I think that, it's kind of sad that the one house that you will see coming down that road is going to be a non-historical house. But because someone chooses their type of manufacturing, I don't think that that should be a reason to waive regulations that everybody else has to live by.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there someone, ma'am? Yeah.
Yes, again, my name is Betsy Camerlin. I'm a landscape architect, live in the neighborhood, actually on the other end of Haygood, down near Millwood.
Yes.
I have a two-story house. It was one of the one on the top there has little faux window boxes. I don't think there's another faux window box in that block. The reason I moved to Melrose Heights was because of the great variety of architecture there. My dad was an architect. Every vacation we went to look at architecture. I love the fact that there's so much variety in the neighborhood because there isn't a precedent in that same block. I don't think any of these features, the bump out, the flared skirting, the tapered rafter ends, they all give this structure a unique statement. And it really, to me, is something that we want to encourage in the neighborhood to take something. I also have solar panels that I had approved through DDRC. I fully, support DDRC's role in interpreting these guidelines. But taking the guidelines to say that this is necessary in the same block, there are so many unique structures in this neighborhood. There's no other precedent. Right around from this site, there's a gable end stucco house that swoops down and has this cute little gateway to it. There's nothing else like that in the neighborhood. There's many examples shown here that are unique structures, and I fully support having an architect do a good design, be concerned with what is going in, and want to live in our neighborhood. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am, for your statement. Is there one other, ma'am? Please step forward. Yeah, you can pull that down and...
I'll yell.
Okay.
My name's Marlene Mackey. I live next door to the current house, and he's my good friend. But I think all this discussion, you're forgetting we are a historic neighborhood. Here's the 17-page guidelines. Melrose Heights Architectural Conservation District Design Guidelines. And Stacy has very carefully and specifically applied the design guidelines to the proposed house. Although the proposed house does not look like any other house in the whole neighborhood, the DDRC staff believe with the specified changes in the plans that it could meet the design guidelines for Melrose Heights. Therefore, if the proposal is approved, it should be approved with the conditions proposed by the staff. The staff recommendations will make the proposed house look more similar to the houses already in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Martha Fowler, as you know, I'm a frequent flyer for the DDRC. So I thank you for listening to us. We live in a very special part of Melrose. Melrose itself is a very special part, but our particular part of Melrose has very large lots. Probably several of us, if we wanted to, could do what he's asking to do. But we would never do that because we are so passionate about the neighborhood that we bought in and that we own in. My grandparents bought my house in 1941. My house is 100 years old. My house has nothing that looks like anything like the house that he's proposing to build. We treasure the houses that we live in. We treasure the neighborhood that we live in. We had a meeting with city staff yesterday where we had the 12 closest houses represented by their homeowners to ask questions about this. Everybody is not so happy about this. The design elements that he's putting together, if you put a zebra on a horse's body, it's not going to look like a zebra. You know, there's several different designs that he's putting together here that they're great designs. Betsy's house is a great design. The house next to her house is a great design. If you put them together, they look like a botched design. I just don't see it. Stacy has worked incredibly hard to try to make this work for John, and I applaud everything that she's doing, but these houses it needs to match our neighborhood. The elements all need to meet the criteria of the Architectural Conservation District. You can make that work. The last time I was before y'all, it was to do a building a block away from here. I couldn't get the windows that looked like the photograph. I had to create the windows that looked like they were supposed to look. They were $18,000. I'm sorry, but I paid for it because it was the right thing to do. And I want to remind y'all that zoning has not divided this property into 2 lots yet. So I just want y'all to think about it. I also want to say that all of these people here are here with the exception of Betsy and John. If y'all would stand up, please.
Is it my understanding you are all of those who are standing are showing a sign of support or an opposition?
Opposition to you accepting the design, well, mostly at all, but at least don't do it without disregard to Stacy's plans.
Thank you very much. Sir, would you like to offer any rebuttal to those who have opposed or offered any statements of opposition?
You know, I'm appreciative of the civil discourse. You know, I plan to live on this block for many years, just with the neighbors. So we don't want to build any bridges, or we don't want to burn any bridges. To a couple points, a couple years ago when I started in Jonathan Chambers' office. I had several discussions with him. We came up with a plan that he would approve for subdividing the land. And then went to zoning, had a couple conversations with the guys at the zoning desk, you know, to have, you know, their approval in writing that the zoning is resolved. I spent several months going back and forth with some of these unique details with the residential plans examiner, John Amaker, I feel like that is settled, and so this is the final stop for me. As far as the house, this property is a strange L-shaped thing that was originally, it's an anomaly. Originally, it was divided just like, Marlene's house and all the houses down. And what I'm actually proposing to do is reestablish the street grid, the rhythm of houses along the street. Because the house that's there, I didn't buy the house that I live in now because it looks great. It's a weird long, it's like a run-on sentence of a long ranch house that was built in 1950 and added on in 1955. And there ain't nothing like it in the neighborhood. And I've not had anyone ever come by and compliment me on it, and I believed him because it's not really that great looking. But I feel like I mean, hey, I'm swinging for the fence here, guys. I want to live in a historic neighborhood that has all the charm, and I don't want to live in a drafty old house that was built 100 years ago. And I want it to not cost a fortune. So, looking through, I mean, you guys are probably getting to the point where you need motions. Looking through the staff's recommendations, the carport, I mean, if you look at that picture in the upper left, whoop, that just disappeared. You can't see it, but back there, about 100 feet from the street, there's a magnolia, and this carport would sit right behind that. And if I paint it dark green or black, I just really don't think you can barely even glimpse it. But if you'd like to defer
And
that
actually,
to staff,
that carport is really not something that we would base any decision on, whether it's approved or not, because it's not something that will be evident from the street. Is that my understanding?
No, the recommendation from staff was that we weren't entirely sure how visible it would be because in the photograph on the top left, that's an abandoned street bed essentially. So there's never going to be something probably built next to his house. And although he has situated it back, you will probably see some of it, if not from the left, you would probably see some of it in looking down between the two houses because it is extending past the house to the right. So unless there were some fence panel or some other item to disguise that or plants or something, I believe it will be visible, but we would probably prefer some sort of staking or something to let us know before we make a decision. And staff would just ask that you defer that back to us so that we can get more information.
Okay.
The vinyl windows, we've talked a good bit about the vinyl windows. The real impact of, if it is said that the vinyl windows that are proposed, even with the faux top sash, if that just gets rejected flat out, I'm going to have to, the exterior design is probably going to remain fairly unchanged. If I have to find some other windows. They make other windows that have this energy performance. They have a tendency to be extremely expensive. So we'll have to see about that. I feel like I've done everything.
What about the mullion between them? Can that work within the system?
The system, there is a possibility to have custom panels made. Custom panels it takes a notch out of them being affordable, and I don't know what it'll do to the energy efficiency. Traditionally, if it's a standard stick-built house, you have 2 or 3 studs right between the windows, and you mount the windows on either side, and you cover it with trim. That's why they all look the way they look. If you fill the whole cavity with 2 or 3 studs, maybe anything can be done with computer modeling and whatnot. And I can always stick another solar panel on the roof, but it does create a thermal bridge, which is kind of counter to the project. If the vinyl windows could be allowed, and if I were to be asked, okay, go and see if you can get a custom one made for all the double windows, so there's the space in between. I think that's within the realm of possibility. The small windows, I just throw myself at your mercy because my wife likes natural light to put her makeup on. We haven't talked about the gables faux half timbering that should be removed. One of the houses that I've looked at the most for precedent is actually Betsy's house, which is a very simple, clean stucco box. But looking at all the adjoining properties, you know, the faux half timbering up in the gables, it's in almost every single house. I somehow hadn't done my homework, and I didn't know that it not being in a two-story house was somehow out of line. But I feel like having that up there provides some detail and some expression up there that if it was just blank, it would not be as interesting. I mean, hey, it'd save you money to take it all out, but I am advocating to put it in because I think it would improve the appearance of it. The projected bay be removed. I think I already talked about that it gets rid of the boxiness, just this flat, blank facade. And also, I mean, that detail is traditionally used to reflect where the stair juts out a little beyond the volume of the house, and that's exactly where the stair is. So I feel like that's a very rational reason, and I feel like, you know, as an architect, I feel like the composition's stronger with it. And, you know, if it's not, I'll take that money and go spend it somewhere else. The front door, I mean, this is not a hill I'm going to die on. If we want to go with a three-foot door, fine, I'm easy with that. The curve at the base of the walls, my concern is that any alternate to the brick at the bottom is going to be sort of this untested, strange something. I mean, I'm literally thinking about, you know, if you put a half-inch steel plate and weld it around the whole thing, maybe paint it sort of brick color, you might be able to pull that foundation back in so you're able to bring the siding right down on top of it. But I mean, and I'd be quick to say, well, I'll just pull the brick in. The problem with pulling the brick in is you have a continuous 4-inch layer of insulation, and then it cuts back to 1 inch. And that's right where the sill studs are at. So if there's a spot where we could conceivably have condensation, I don't want to have it on the bottom sill of the first floor studs. So that's my hesitation. But I mean, if I'm told, you go and figure it out, I'll go and figure it out. I mean, that's fine. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Because I'm not quite following how the brickwork is functioning. Is the wall not sitting directly on the floor framing, or
the brick's only purpose, and the details of the brick was something that Stacy and I kind of came up with at the 11th hour here, so I didn't get a printout of wall section, and I don't know if I showed this to him, So the idea of the system is it's a slab and grade system, so crawl space and whatnot, that's just a great spot for leaks and air infiltration and whatnot. So it's a slab on grade system. I'm showing it to be raised up above, you know, about 16 or 18 inches to match the other houses around. So the wood studs sit on the edge of the slab, and then outboard of that, there's a continuous 4-inch insulation that runs from the bottom of the footing all the way up to the underside of the roof. So continuous insulation, just like, you know, the newest IBC codes. So the challenge is, how do you protect the insulation that's subgrade? And I probably would have submitted this project to this commission 6 months ago, but I was figuring out that detail with John Amaker because he wasn't really comfortable with exactly how insulation going below grade was going to work with termites and whatnot. So we made a couple changes to the system standard foundation details. But brick, grouted solid behind, it's kind of the tried and true. It'll keep the water out, you know, if it comes in. There's other options. I mean, we could conceivably do like a steel plate like you'd see in a retaining wall, and we all know it would take, you know, 100 years for it to rust away. So, I mean, I could conceivably do that. That is, again, something that's not found in the neighborhood and not something that I am anxious to propose nor you know, defend if this comes back here. So, I mean, I feel like what is proposed it's again not the cheapest option because you've got to miter all your exterior or your outside corners. But I feel like it's something that is, you know, it's in the vocabulary of this, you know, era of construction. You know, it's the best I came up with. I mean, if you guys, John, if you got a great idea to fix that solution, that'd be great. I'll give you my card. You can give me a call.
Question to you. Your setback is is as most other houses on that street? Is that what I'm led to understand?
You know, the setback, originally what was proposed, well, the setback, if you go back to the last one, Stacy. So the setback from the face of the masonry at the porch is 20 feet. After mowing an acre of property for the last 3 years, I am really eager to not spend much more of my life on a lawnmower. So I would prefer to have the house closer to the street rather than farther away. But what you don't see in this was originally there was an idea that I had proposed to add a small porch at the front door of the existing house. Like I said, the existing house is not the most attractive house on the street, and I thought maybe introducing a gable to address the street to give a sense of entry would be an improvement on it. After some discussions with Stacy, in the end we decided just to make a clean cut and just cut it off and not add that. So the house could conceivably slide back some. I mean, I'm fine with that. That's not really, you know.
Well, the reason I ask that, and I'm mulling through my mind here in reference to guidelines, the detail at the base of the house, how visible would it be from the street?
Well, I mean, it all depends on how many bushes I plant. If you don't want to see it, I mean, you know, if I had my druthers, I'd.
I'm asking Stacy, your opinion
Well,
here?
it's only 20 feet back from the right-of-way, so it'd probably be pretty visible, especially because of the way that the porch walls and columns are creating a pretty strong vertical right next to them.
Okay.
And I just want to throw in two things. Sorry to interrupt, but one thing is there are examples of net zero historic houses that are 100 years old that have achieved net zero. So it is not exclusive to new construction. Just one thing to consider. And the other is that the material of the window that's being proposed is vinyl. We have not approved to date any vinyl windows in an architectural conservation district. And so that is just something to keep in mind, the material as well as the design, because the material is informing this design, obviously. But that's just two things to consider. But I do think that would be visible. I think there are probably other options we haven't explored extensively, but if y'all have any suggestions for this, feel free to recommend.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think at this point we'll deliberate here if there's any deliberation to be had by commission. Anyone? Mr. Powell? Mr. Horger?
I've been thinking a lot the back and forth of an architect trying to do something unique and different in a historic neighborhood, and the challenges of working with neighbors that you've lived with and intend to live with for many years, and the very complicated challenges that you've taken upon yourself to do something that, like you said, is swinging for the fences. And so it's exciting to see new construction going up in something that's so difficult to build in. One of the first gentlemen who spoke, and obviously if I need to speak into this better, one of the first gentlemen who spoke pointed out that if this was an existing building, he'd be bound to all the same guidelines, all the historic nature, all the expense that comes with it, and that's something we really can't get around, at least in my opinion, in my interpretation of the guidelines, that a system does not nullify the other responsibilities in the neighborhood. And while Stacy and I disagree about it quite a lot, I have to agree with that she's very thorough in this, and she has gone point by point, and everything that she has stated is very well backed up and supported. So as difficult as it might be to reconcile things like the window details and the foundation in this neighborhood, I think it's part of the obligation you have as a neighbor and a citizen of that area. And so that's where I'm coming from. I love that you're doing a new building. I love that you're trying to do something as challenging as this, but you're trying to do it in an area that has a lot of other requirements. Sure. And I think it's our obligation to enforce those.
Thank you, Mr. Powell. If there's no further discussion, would you like to speak, ma'am? You need to come forward to the mic, please. And though we heard your name before, please state it again.
I'm Anna Redwine. I'm a neighbor, and I'm all for good design. I'm all for innovation. But I question, and I think this is really cool, but I question why it needs to be on that site. And I also am wondering what's happening with, and I don't know if this is where we discussed that, but I'm wondering what's happening with the existing structure. We haven't talked at all about that. Those are my thoughts.
Well, thank you. We are going to go forward with the motion. Let me just answer your last question, ma'am, that the existing structure is not before us as part of a request. Is there a motion, please, in regards to 1420 Haygood Avenue as a request for certificate of design approval? Changes to existing house, but new construction primarily for the single-family house.
Give it a try. Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion that we approve and the certificate of design approval for 1420 Haygood Avenue based on the recommendation that it generally meets Section 5 of the guidelines and Section 17.674F of the city ordinance with the following conditions: that the carport is excluded from approval at this time and be deferred to staff so that staff can determine the visibility from the public right-of-way and make a decision for approval, that the paired windows gain 1 million between them, that any new gable vent detail be reviewed by the staff, that the front door be narrowed to a width similar to historic doors in the area, and that other design details be worked with and deferred to staff.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second? There appears to be no second to the motion to approve. That takes us to an additional or supplemental, I guess is the right word? Amended motion?
Someone cares to make it.
By rule, maybe discuss that.
Yes.
Oh, right. Sorry. No, Mr. Gressa would have to have amended it, so
Okay.
it died without a second.
I'm sorry, we'll ask John's opinion.
That's right.
Okay, so that motion to approve has died with having no second. Is there an additional motion on 1420 Haygood?
Having heard the prior motion and checked off the items that Mr. Gressett had listed, I feel that the vinyl windows need to be addressed in some way, and that to exclude those would be to presume to accept them as is. And while I think there are solutions, I don't know that what's designed currently is the right solution. So if I may make a new motion, is that the correct
Yes,
process?
at this point, it's a brand new motion that we're asking for.
And Mr. Gressett, just to clarify, what I'm going to do is replicate the list of recommendations that you have provided with the addition of that vinyl window recommendation. So that's my goal is. I move that in regard to 1420 Haygood, that a request for certificate of design approval be approved based on Section 5 of the guidelines and Section 17-674F of the city ordinance, with the following conditions: that the carport is excluded from the approval and be deferred to staff to determine visibility from the public right-of-way, that the proposed vinyl windows either be replaced with a window consistent with the guidelines or that they may be concealed entirely by an exterior window that meets the guidelines as determined by the staff, that the paired windows gain a mullion between them, that the gable's faux half-timbering be removed, that any new gable vent detailing must be reviewed by staff, that the front door be narrowed to a width similar to historic doors, and that all other details be deferred to staff.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion to approve and a second. Any further discussion? I'm going to offer for discussion here the importance, as stated earlier by a fellow commissioner, that the importance of architectural conservation districts behooves us to strictly follow guidelines and interpret them in ways that are meaningful, that protects the integrity of the district. I say this as evidence of what my vote may be here. Any further discussion? There being none, we'll call for the a roll call, please.
Mr. Bucknight?
No.
Mr. Gressett?
Yes.
Mr. Herger? Yes. Mr. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Nguyen?
No.
The motion passes.
Thank you. You have a passage of your request, sir. Our next case is 2207 College Street. Not easy, huh?
The next case is 2207 College Street. This is another new construction. This is also 2 stories, but it's located in the Old Shandon, Lower Waverly Protection Area. This will be on a existing vacant lot located between two-story historic buildings that contribute to the district. The guidelines for this district are the only parameters by which the DDRC is permitted to make a decision on this project. Interior design, lighting, or furniture placements are not considered in the guidelines listed below. This district was created in 2001 at the request of the neighborhood with the intent that the new construction would reinforce existing historic patterns. As mentioned in the guidelines below for new construction, the style of a new house does not need to imitate a past architectural style, but it does need to be consistent with existing buildings along a street in terms of height, scale, proportion, and rhythm of openings, setbacks, orientation, and spacing. While the proposed house has a blend of styles, its features should reflect the guidelines. Staff commented to the applicant that the original submittal was not in keeping with the guidelines in terms of window openings on side elevations, and they have submitted an altered version. Both of those are available on the slideshow, should you need to see them. A number of details of the building do comply with the guidelines, such as the height, scale, and setback. This is the lot that is being used. As you can see, the curb cut is unfortunately located centrally on this particular lot. This is the house to the west, and you can note its side elevation has a great deal of symmetry with large, regularly sized, actually, rectangular windows vertically oriented. And this is the house to the east with the 1990s photo, just because there's a tree in front of it now, so it's difficult to see. These are other 2-story houses that are nearby, but they are not on this street. The guidelines for this district, especially when talking about materials and details, reference the fact that you should be using historic examples from the block or street. This is an important part of our historic district language because each historic district has interpreted architectural styles differently. And so, particularly in Melrose Heights and in this neighborhood, from street to street, you can tell which street you are on because of their interpretations of these different styles. The request from the applicant is does include a transom window and a diamond window. Those are not found on the block or street. There are some small small square windows on the street to the south on Green Street, Some of them are original, some are not. And this is the proposed building. It is a mixture of styles. It has craftsman-type windows, but no exposed rafter tails. So it's kind of a blend of folk Victorian with some wood shake. The facade has an acceptable rhythm of openings and massing, but the side elevations do not. This is the right side. As you can see, the proposal is to have one wide three light window on the first floor that is horizontally oriented, and then a small window upstairs, a transom window, and then one full-size vertically oriented window. This creates a large void, a large wall space, which lacks the voids that are typically seen on historic buildings, and arranges the massing and the rhythm of openings in a way that is not sympathetic with the area. This is staff's proposal, which would be to eliminate the transom and the horizontal size windows and to introduce two full-size vertically oriented double hung in appearance windows on the first floor.
Stacy, may we ask on that elevation, the reason why the window on the upper left is smaller than the other? Is that a special condition? Like a bathroom or something like that?
The floor plan, we can look at the floor plan here.
I'm just wondering if that could be the same size.
That does appear to be in a bathroom. If you look on slide 96, this is the second floor, and to the right of the three, the bottom on the three, it is above the toilet in the bathroom, as it's currently oriented inside. And then the left side also has the massing and rhythm of openings is also inconsistent because of the large wall spaces that are created. And there is only one full-size vertically oriented rectangular window on this elevation as well. So staff's recommendation would be to introduce two full-size rectangular windows closer to the facade to be more in keeping with historic patterns found in the area. And then this is the first floor plan. We have not reviewed the rear wall, so there are windows on the rear wall, but we won't see those. But this is the first floor plan. The red lines indicate the locations of the proposed windows. And then the second floor is here. These are some examples provided by the applicant for some other small windows found in the area. Some are in additions, the transom and the gable, in the dormer. Obviously, a dormer window doesn't usually translate well to a side wall, and that's not really found on any side walls on this block or street. We do have some other examples provided by the applicant here, and the door that is proposed here is probably appropriate. There are not really any historic doors left on this block or street. It's a very small street. If you would like to match the windows, we would recommend that. This is the proposed window, which is vinyl, which is allowed in the protection area. There are two driveways proposed. As we showed you earlier on, the existing curb cut is basically centrally located, and according to the city ordinance, driveways need to be located as a straight line, and as it's currently proposed, it would curve quite a bit, both in option A on the left and option B on the right. Our preference, if we must go with one of these, would be option A, because we are only allowed to offer a 12-foot wide driveway. But we would also like to explore a possibility of the tree next to the existing curb cut to see if it is healthy. If it is slated for removal by forestry, since it's on city property, then that would allow for a straight driveway. So we can explore that further. So our recommendation is actually for approval because of some compliance with Section 4A of the guidelines, as well as Section 17674 of City Ordinance. With the following conditions: the setback of the house shall be in line with adjacent houses. The fenestration on the left side elevation shall be revised to include one additional full-size window near the front on the second floor, and replacement of the diamond window with a full-size rectangular window on the first floor that is compatible with historic buildings and with a consistent 3/1 pane configuration throughout. The fenestration on the right side elevation shall be revised to remove the transom window on the second floor and the wide horizontal 3-light window on the first floor. That 2 full-size vertical rectangular windows will be added on the first floor in an appearance and pattern consistent with historic buildings. That any accent window must be square, not a diamond, and placed within a wall on a story that has at least 2 full-size vertically oriented rectangular windows, and that it should be toward the middle or rear of the wall to follow historic patterns. That the driveway design first attempt to meet the city ordinance with a straight driveway and curb cut, but if city forestry staff determine the trees should stay in the current right-of-way, then option A of the submitted driveway will be used, with further details about width, length, and materials worked out with staff, and all details deferred to staff. And we would just like to note that on the floor plan, some of our recommendations would place windows in closets, and we are aware. But we would recommend, as we have on previous projects, that they might be able to work out a window that is walled in on the inside, or if they decide to use shutters, a closed shutter with trim to make it appear that there's an opening there to match the rhythm and massing on historic buildings. Do you have any questions for staff? On the, I believe on this elevation, the left side upstairs, yes. So in the bottom part of the floor plan is a bedroom with a double door closet in front of the stairs there. And so the window I'm proposing would probably fall right about where that window is, where that closet is. No, I'm sorry, the red lines are showing the proposed window location. So my recommendation, I apologize, I should have made that clearer for you, would be for the bottom of this drawing on the left side in the closet, probably, for that particular window. No, I'm sorry, on the left, this side, on the second story closest to the facade.
Or they could restudy the floor plan.
Correct.
So this is your recommendation. Can we go back to what they're proposing so we can see the difference?
Okay. Would you, sir, I'm assuming you're the owner, or would you like to give us your presentation?
In the interest of time, I'd like to be able to just focus on the...
State your name first,
Sorry,
please.
excuse me. My name is David Barry.
Okay, David.
Celtic Works is the name of the company that I'm in, and we wanted to build this home. We own the property. One of the areas going back and forward with Stacy was to do with the windows. So I apologize for the sort of sketches of the side elevations. We were trying to avoid the cost of redrawing them so we'd get approval first. One of the interests that we have is trying to be able to put some nice architectural details on the house. The 2 of the windows that come into question is a transom window that we wanted to put over that tub in that bathroom to be able to bring some natural light into it. Was surprised to hear that a transom was not a historic detail. Would like to see if we can move forward to be able to have that. And then the diamond-shaped window is something that we've done in different historic neighborhoods with new construction. So again, was surprised to know that that was not a historic detail that was not recommended or was not wanted to see on that elevation. The concern of the closet having a window, I would love to see. I mean, we could certainly have the double hung on that left side exterior elevation, have the double hung down in that area in the stairs. But love to be able to see if we could move the diamond window up to that closet to give some privacy in the closet area, but maybe bring some light, which would be fine in the design. The 3 small square windows was just a detail to be able to have in that living room to bring light coming into the room higher than a double hung window. It's a detail that I've seen in some homes to avoid looking out that window and looking at the neighborhood, the old home that's there to the right of the proposed house. So I would like to be able to see if we could come up with some more interesting windows in this home rather than double hung, long rectangular windows. Would like to know that in these historic neighborhoods that there would be some room to be able to do something like that. I don't think it's a very odd request.
Thank you, sir. I see no person sitting in the gallery, but I am going to ask for the benefit of the record here. Is there anyone here in favor or in opposition to this project request? There being none, any further questions or discussion by the commission members?
Maybe 1 or 2 questions. I too, the diamond window sort of surprised me that that's not historic. I thought I'd perhaps seen that detail on other houses, and it usually means to me it's somewhere on a stair. Right. And so I thought that was an appropriate, on this elevation that's shown on the screen now, having the 3 box windows, your explanation for why you put it there, some privacy, a little bit of an unusual feature, you know, I could buy that. And again, I think it's not as strange to me as the transom window on the 2nd floor. And I know that we're trying to replicate the placement of the windows as close as possible to others in the neighborhood. But again, I think some of this variety and uniqueness lets houses stand on their own as long as they're compatible in an overall sense with the neighborhood.
You can't tell. I tend to agree with you, Ashby. I think that, and I know from study of vernacular architecture, not on this block or in this neighborhood, or particularly in Columbia, but I know that generally speaking, builder houses, you know, from past eras have occasionally quirky things going on them. So I think that the front of the house addresses the neighborhood in a very formal kind of way that seems appropriate to me. Whether there's a transom or not at the 2nd floor, I'm concerned about not having the ability to have natural light into that bathroom. I think that would be unfortunate. So I think that there should be a way to get natural light into there, and a transom window would not be the thing to do there. So I think that there's a certain expression of function that is appropriate. I tend to be, and this diamond window thing has come up before on other projects, but it denotes stare, and I think that one of the things about that diamond-shaped window, if you go back to the recommendation, part of it just sort of makes things, if we can go to the recommended, well, there's this and then there's the other one. Once you start to get the double hung window in there, you got no wiggle room. So, you know, if you have the diamond window, for instance, you can move that thing around some, and you can get a window above that doesn't have to be in a closet, which obviously doesn't work. So it seems to me that there would be a way to work through that. Or if for some reason the diamond is the 45-degree angle just doesn't work, you could turn it and have a small window. But if it's small, you get to move it around, and you can align it with a window upstairs. because I do agree that more glazing on that facade would be a good idea. And then there was one other thing that, and Dave, I don't know where you feel about this, but in the recommended elevation of that elevation, if we could look at that, the windows that are reconfigured, if we could look at the staff recommended version of that. There you go. You know, I looked at the plans and I lined them up, first floor and second floor. I know how to do that. And it seemed to me that you could get those two smaller windows to align vertically. It seemed to me that if the transom that's being proposed at the bottom of the stair, I mean the window that's being proposed at the bottom of the stair didn't have to be a full window, double-hung window, but it could be a smaller window at least. Then you could move that around. You can get then a double-hung window above it, so that organizes better, and you don't have to, you know, you don't want a window in the closet. I'm sorry, the whole thing is a closet.
Yeah, the whole thing.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay, so well.
That was
never
where
mind.
what you're saying, Tom, is that the window that's in the bathroom that's under the stairs below, if we matched the same size of that window and matched it over that start of the stairs going
Right.
upstairs in the first floor, kept those two the same size. But I think the area that Stacy was bringing up was that area that above where
Yeah.
the closet is.
Right,
Doesn't
I
have any
missed that.
glazing. So would it be okay to put that diamond window up there to be able to get rid of some of that massing? It's not a huge house. It's not a huge wall. I mean,
I've completely missed that.
Just for reference, I think it's 37 feet, which is about 3 feet longer, just for visual reference, than the bulk of the walls adjacent. So if that gives you some reference as far as massing and rhythm. And just so you're aware, yes, you have seen a diamond. Yes, you have approved a diamond on other historic buildings, but not on this block or street. And that is the language that is in the guidelines. So that's the language that staff is bound by, that the DRC is bound by, unless you can interpret that somehow differently. So yes, you have seen it, but the whole point of these guidelines is that you are using the local context, what you see on the street. Those diamonds those are often seen in Elmwood Park. This is not Elmwood Park. That's just something to consider when you're talking about these items that you have seen before that seem appropriate. Yes, they do, but you do need to consider what the guideline language says.
just to clarify, the guidelines do reflect the block and the surrounding streets. And there is a diamond window on Oak Street, which is about a minute walk from this house.
Yes,
and
there is.
I failed to give a photograph of that home.
Yeah, there is. Let me get to the aerial.
It's beside
just
that
to the
commercial.
right.
It's beside that commercial building that you see above the tagline there. It's down on Pine Street, so it's about a minute walk.
To the right. It's on Oak.
All right, well, thank you. Would commissioners like to offer any other thoughts or recommendations? Any further discussion?
Which of these
Well, I think what I think is helpful in these situations is being able to know, can we talk about a diamond window? Can we talk about the transom window? If they're off the design or the architectural freedom or whatever historic guidelines, well then I'm pretty limited to what we can do, which is unfortunate. So I think that's where I'm at coming before you, is being able to say, well, can I go back to the staff, knowing that these are guidelines, they're not rules. And one of the lines in the guidelines for new construction is new buildings need not imitate past architectural styles. They may reflect the era of their own construction to carry on the tradition of diversity in building styles present. So diversity, from where I am as a contractor, new construction, says that 2x2 windows, diamond, a transom window is something that should be a negotiating thing under a guideline with the staff, and I'd love to be able to do that with Stacy.
I guess, is there some place, because I recognize, and actually before this evening read that very thing that you've read, and I've read it in the past, Dave, and I've worked in historic areas and interpreted. So I can understand. Is there something that specifically, and I guess this question is to staff, that if you could point to where it's restrictive enough that we would be beyond the bounds of the guidelines by allowing the transom or the diamond? Is there some language that
I believe so, and
directly
we would,
says we shouldn't?
We would like, yes, and we would like for y'all to make the decision and not to defer it back to staff, just so you know.
Well, I was just wondering if you could cite.
Yeah, that was just something to mention, since he'd mentioned that. When he did mention that the new buildings need not imitate past architectural styles, it is worthwhile to note that the sentence before that actually says new construction should be consistent with existing buildings along a street in terms of height, scale, proportion, and rhythm of openings, which I think is critical here. And so when we talk about the massing that's created by a small transom window, you're leaving a large void in that bay. You're creating a bay by creating an opening. And when those bays are inconsistent and out of proportion to historic buildings, you are changing the massing. That also changes the rhythm of openings. And then under materials, textures, and details, item 9 under new construction, it says to use materials, textures, and architectural features that are visually compatible with those of the historic buildings on the block or street. And so in our interpretation, the block or street is your world of reference. I understand that may seem very restrictive, but we do not find these small transom windows, even if you were to travel around the district. They do not exist in this proportion at all, nor does the large 3-light horizontal exist. Yes, there is a diamond around the corner. There's
on the same block.
Which is not on the same block. On its block, it's across the street on a different block, but one could argue what that reference is, and they can interpret that how they wish.
I think it hinges on the term visually compatible, and I think that is open to interpretation. It's not saying replicate, it's saying visually compatible, and it may or may not be visually compatible, but I think that's some fairly open language. So I guess that's, for others to comment on that, but I think that's really what it hinges on, is that phrase. I have a hard time with an interpretation that gets us to the circumstances where we can't figure out a way for the applicant to have natural light in the bathroom, for instance. And you're not going to put a double hung window at the tub. So I think that there must be flexibility enough in the interpretation of the guidelines to allow some fenestration at that location.
Or the applicant may have to alter their floor plan.
Without altering the floor plan looks pretty rational. I think that putting a window in the closet, of course, can't do that.
If I may, Ms. Ritchie, you actually mentioned something that I don't think we've talked about before, and that's the idea of using closed shutters in place of windows, where instead of having a true window there, we simply put trim, casing, perhaps not casing, but and installed fixed shutters on the outside. In place of a window, so the rhythm and massing is maintained even if you don't actually have the expense of a window. And to your point, Mr. Savory, the idea of having a transom, and I've done this before, not in historic neighborhoods, but actually putting a shutter below a transom so that the massing of the overall opening, when looked at from a trim perspective, matches other features on the house. We're getting into points at which we'd almost have to draw it in order to approve something. And my concern with the recommendations is it's so wordy and it so defines what the solution will be that it really restricts what the right solution will be. And I feel like if you spend a little time moving things around a little bit, I feel like a better solution would come out of it rather than us dictating that.
I agree.
You know that I always prefer giving an approval and then letting them come back if they want to change something. So that's my.
Meet some of the concerns that staff has voiced.
Therefore,
Unless we draw it up right now for everybody.
One of the desires is to be able to see how the staff interpreting the guidelines is what is a concern. And so that's why I got up earlier to speak, and so I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, was it's so important to be able to look at the guidelines of what's written in for some of these great historic neighborhoods that gives some of the requests for different shaped windows to be able to be talked about and not necessarily just read as a guideline to say it's very specific that a transom is not allowed because it's not on the block or on the street, that it can actually take away from a home that's on a street in a neighborhood that needs some interesting new construction. I don't believe it's taken away the historic element of this community. That's where it's difficult.
it may sound difficult, and in all respects, it is. The city of Columbia has countless neighborhoods, architectural, historical, so on. If you took 100 interpretations of a guideline and did 100 different structures based on those 100 different interpretations, then an architectural preservation district wouldn't be that. Would you agree?
I would, but I think in this case we're not talking about 100.
Well, my point being that we can't simply based on, staff certainly has the obligation, therefore, to take the guidelines, which are in black and white, apply them as they see fit with a standard, and believe me, I think they work very hard to apply standards in each district that comes before them. It's our responsibility yet, as a commission, to interpret the guidelines as they are written in black and white, considering each district. Now, there may be some difference, and there is wiggle room. And I think that's where we're finding here a little bit of a conundrum. But I think we are at a point where everyone has had a fair discussion, and I'm going to ask for a motion. Is there one? My motion, therefore, is to deny the application or request for design approval for new construction based on the absence of features that meet the guidelines as presented. And I'll ask for a second. Okay, just as we've had now prior to tonight, there's no second, then that motion dies. Is there anyone willing to provide for a additional motion?
Go ahead, please.
I'll attempt one for you. I move that we grant a certificate of design approval for a new single-family residence at 2207 College Street with the following conditions. Setback of the house shall be in line with adjacent houses. The penetration on the left side elevation shall be revised to include one additional full-size window near the front of the second floor in replacement of the diamond window with a full-size rectangular window on the first floor that is compatible with historic buildings and with a consistent 3-1 pane configuration throughout. The penetration on the right side elevation shall be revised to remove the transom window on the second floor and the wide horizontal 3-light window on the first floor. That 2 full-size vertical rectangular windows will be added on the first floor and an appearance and pattern consistent with historic buildings. That any accent window must be square, not a diamond, and placed within a wall on a story that has at least 2 full-size vertically oriented rectangular windows, and that it should be toward the middle or rear of the wall to follow historic patterns. That the driveway design first attempt to meet the city ordinance that a straight driveway and curb cut, but if the city forestry staff determine the trees should stay, then option A of the submitted driveway shall be used, with further details about width, length, and materials worked out with staff. All details deferred to staff.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion for approval of a request for certificate of design approval for new construction at 2207 College Street. We have a second on that motion. Any further discussion? There being none, will you call a roll, please, for the vote?
Mr. Bachnight?
Yes.
Mr. Gressett?
Yes.
Mr. Herger? Yes. Mr. Powell?
Yes.
Mr. Savory?
No.
Mr. Wynn?
No.
The motion passes.
Okay. There is a passing, therefore, congratulations, sir. That takes us now, as we move along, to the approval for minutes of our last month's meeting. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes that are required or requested?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make the motion that we accept the minutes as distributed.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
We've got a motion and a second to approve the minutes from, what date was that? August 11th. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those against say nay. Motions or minutes pass. Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
We've got both a motion and a second. Meeting is adjourned with all ayes or yays.
Yes.
Thank you very much.